Díomh gach daoine agus fáilte go dtí a cad brethbh is mise cuimhín ó Flanagan. Hello everybody, you're very welcome to the Brehon Academy. I'm Kevin Flanagan. And boy, do I have an explosive show lined up for you tonight. Time and time again, I have heard about this book. Many of you suggested to me, and it was last week, I believe, one of you left a comment suggesting that I read this book again. And just given the fact that what we were talking about last week, and if those of you who had missed it, we were talking about Scotia, Queen Scotia, and the connections between Ireland and Egypt. Somebody said, you need to read this book by Conor MacDari, Irish Wisdom in the Bible and Pyramids, from 1923. And now I knew that I had that book on my hard drive, and I was familiar with the contents of it simply because I'm familiar with Michael Tessarien's work on Irish origins of civilization. So I decided to search for the file, and while I was searching for the file on the Spotlight thing on the Mac, a YouTube link popped up. So I clicked on this YouTube link, and I was so surprised to find an audio file that was recorded 10 years ago. And it was the book from cover to cover, 7 hours long. So what did I do? I reached out to the man behind the voice and asked him for permission to air this episode, this book, on my channel. And Darrell T. Smith II, he said yes. And at this particular moment, I would like to just extend my deepest and sincerest gratitude to Darrell T. Smith for allowing me to use this audio recording. Now, Darrell T. Smith II asked me to plug his new YouTube channels, and that's what I'm going to do now. And I'm going to put the links in the description and in the top comment down below. So yeah, if you don't think you have to just type them out, you can just go down there and you'll find them. So this is his old channel. It's called Cullen Rule by Venus. And this is a gold mine of information. That's his trailer playing there. It's from 10 years ago, so I'll start in 2015. And just as I let that music play in the background, I want to scroll down here and show you. Here's the book that we're going to be listening to tonight. And it makes some bold claims. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's basically claiming that Irish wisdom is preserved in the Bible and the pyramids. He also has some, like, I can't wait to go through all of these books, because he has The Hero with 1,000 Faces, which I started listening to the other night. I'm going to listen to this one as well, Hamlet's Mill. And you can see it just has a lot of interesting, and unusual topics. Now, his new channel, which he's asked me to plug as well, is called Quasar Spectra Readings by DTSII. And this is a channel that's focusing more on science fiction, pre-90s science fiction to be precise. You can see he has psychology and philosophy books. He has astronomy, astrophysics, cosmology. He even has books on computer and code or mathematics. And that's not all. He also has Spotify. And he has recently uploaded the book that we're about to play tonight. There. It looks like it was his first upload on the 5th of April. So thank you, Daryl, for agreeing to give me permission to show this video. I hope you like how I've improved it. And not that there is anything wrong with it in the first place. There's a couple of disclaimers that I want to give as well. It's mostly around the pronunciation of certain words. So around 35 minutes in, you will hear him say the Council of Nice. And I went and checked the book. It actually says that's what it says. But I believe that that's a misprint in the book, because I think it's the Council of Nicaea, which happened at 325 AD. So it's not his fault if he mispronounces it. And he also has difficulty pronouncing some Irish words, especially in part 2. But what he does in that case is he spells them out. So we can forgive him as an American for who usually struggle with Gaelic words. I think he does a reasonable job with the pronunciation. So please be kind in the comments. Now, if you'd like me to invite Daryl on to speak with him and to talk with him about his work, then please leave a comment below and say you would like to hear that. Now, disclaimer number 2. Airing this episode does not mean that I, Kevin Flanagan, endorse or agree with everything that's being said. So please also be kind to me in the comments as well. I'm showing this because of intellectual curiosity, and I thought it would be a good topic to follow on from last week's video about Queen Scota. Now, I'm not saying everything that's in this audio is true, but if even a small portion of it is true, well, then the ramifications of this are earth-shattering. But before we begin to play the video, I'm asking you to please subscribe to the channel if you're not already. If you're interested in anything to do with early Irish culture, history, mythology, and if you want to learn a little bit more about Brehon law, please subscribe to the channel. You won't be disappointed. I guarantee you that. And please like the video as well. And I'm going to ask you to like the video now before you watch it. And if it doesn't meet your high standards, your high expectations, well, you can always unlike the video and I won't hold it against you. Also, please follow us on our social media channels. We are clearly on YouTube, but we're also on Facebook, we're on X, and we're on Instagram. And very last thing, I'm inviting you to visit BrehonAcademy.org if you want to learn more about these topics, and you want to read our blogs, you want to do our online courses, and please visit the merch store while you're there, and you can get a really cool top like this. So, with that being said, let's jump into the video.
Irish Wisdom Preserved in Bible and Pyramids by Conor MacDari, published 1923. Preface. In offering these pages to the public, I am in accord with a sentiment which is universal, at least I believe among enlightened minds, and that is the desire to know the truth of history instead of the fiction which has been substituted therefor. In these pages I have drawn aside the veil with which true history has been hidden, besides disclosing what agencies perpetrated this great deception and their reasons for so doing. Thereby I enable the reader to obtain a clear perspective of the past. The muse of history has had no official chronicler to record the events of mankind and preserve them intact for the inspection of posterity. Instead, the field has been preempted and exploited by powerful and selfish interests who have falsified history to an outrageous extent. During a former age, a system of records and a chronicle of events came down to us until a comparatively recent time, historically speaking, which gave a true account and a just portrayal of life in those ancient times. The reason for this was that it was the natural and obvious result of a static or settled state of society which lasted for thousands of years, and there was no object or purpose in concealment. During those ages, the intellectual powers had full play, and the individual man reached a higher plane, poetically, philosophically, and spiritually, than at other periods in the world's history. This may be rightly called the Celtic cultural age. To this age we look back as the source from which we obtained the great gifts which we of today esteem as of the most priceless value to mankind. The causes inherent in man and society which brought about a change from this ancient social state, resulting in the suppression of the history of those times and substitution, therefore, of a mass of fiction, are told the first time in these pages. I might easily have enlarged this little volume. In fact, it was with difficulty that I was enabled to keep it within its present compressed form. To enlarge upon or to extend some of the topics treated herein, such as the Bible, would require a very large volume or series of volumes in themselves. However, I hope that I have given out enough of truth in this work to interest or to help everyone into whose hands it may come. Believing this to be so, I send it forth to go from man to man like a messenger to deliver its message of light and truth. Chapter 1. The Problem of the Pyramids. The solution of the mystery of the pyramids of Egypt has been a problem which has not only puzzled mankind in general during the ages of the past, but which has as well mystified the minds of scholars and thinkers even to this our present day. For excepting the select few who were initiates of the ancient priesthood to whom it was a carefully guarded secret, no others knew or understood its full import and significance. The Great Pyramid, in its original and dazzling splendor of light under the Egyptian sun, was the object of wonderment and awe to beholders. It surpassed in sublime grandeur any other monument or structure ever erected by man on this globe. It was considered the greatest of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Its partial destruction and defacement by removing its upper part in capstone, and by stripping it of its outer casing of white stone, which gave to it an aspect of dazzling brightness, leaving it in outward appearance bare and nude, silent and mute as to its mission, as a milestone without a figure. This has been a great loss to mankind. In its former glory, it was a mountain of light, a blaze of brightness, a symbol in the desert. It was a testimonial in living stone, bespeaking to mankind of their inheritance in a spiritual kingdom. At noonday, its lofty, golden capstone seemed to be at one with the sun, uniting earth and heaven in eternal unity, a symbolic union of spirit and matter. To mar this sublime pillar, this grand masterpiece of the Irish Magian priests of 𝗂𝗍, was a part of a plot as selfish as any ever conceived. It was conceived and put into effect by the ruling spirits at the head of the Roman Church and State of their day, who cherished the ambitious and far-reaching idea of nothing less than universal rule for their church and empire. In the course of these pages, I will endeavor to explain and expose the conspiracy and the means by which those designing men who composed it advanced their project. And with the aid of their successors, they, I propose to show, by persistent effort, brought the greater part of the Western world under their empire and church dominion, and brought this conspiracy to an almost complete success. It was the idea held by the leaders of the Roman Church and State, they were practically one, that all power should be centralized in the head of the Church, who was also emperor of the state, and any and all religious institutions which in any way conflicted with this ideal were to be done away with. For this reason, the mystery cults were suppressed and initiation into the ancient or esoteric mysteries were forbidden, so that no religious establishment, worship, or practice would exist which would draw and hold men to it other than the Roman state church, and besides, as the study and preparation necessary for those who were selected for initiation into the higher mysteries was such as to develop a highly philosophic and spiritual state of mind, such study and preparation did not comport with the object which the church rulers had in view. Such minds would not yield adherence to a mere political and idolatrous church, whose doctrines were, in the main, intended for the uninstructed multitude. Such minds could not be dominated by a political or mercenary priesthood. They were enlightened men, and they stood in the way of the church project. Therefore, the institutions which produced such men were to be suppressed. The great pyramid of 𝗂𝗍 was used as a temple of initiation for inculcating the mysteries of nature and the occult powers of the soul. The decree of the church and the execution of its policy to close the great pyramid temple and suppress its institution practically put an end to the development of enlightened minds in the Nile Valley. The way was then clear for the unopposed spread of superstition and cruel fanaticism among the masses. With the great pyramid closed, its passages filled up with stone and rubbish, its initiate priests banished, the way was paved for the long night of darkness and ignorance which followed and which is known in history as the Dark Ages. These were the conditions which were best suited for the political Church of Rome to take root and flourish in, and wherever she flourishes today, such conditions are more or less present. During the Dark Ages, intercourse between the countries of Western Europe and few who happened to be enlightened enough to know of their existence, as education was not as general at that time as it is today, it was mostly confined to small castes, even in the so-called enlightened countries. Since the Napoleonic expedition to Egypt in the early part of the 19th century, and because of the accounts brought back by those savants who were members of that expeditionary force, an intense interest was awakened in France, Germany, and particularly England, where a hot controversy raged for many years between the advocates of different theories as to when the pyramids were built, for what purpose, and who their builders were. All this resulted in the creation among the enlightened class of what was practically a pyramid cult. This cult succeeded in spreading its views from this British center to all other countries. It all served to bring about an intense interest in the Great Pyramid and caused an almost endless speculation as to its erection and use. Some held that it was built as a place of worship, others that it was built for a granary, a place of refuge in time of danger or of flood, a tomb for a king, or merely as a caprice or whim of a ruler to keep the people employed. The idea was also advanced that the pyramids and obelisks were built as a part of a system for the measuring of time by the length of the shadow they cast, and for determining the length of the seasons and the proper time for planting. Some of these speculations were as specious and far-fetched as others were ingenious, but all to vain purpose. Deep thinkers could not quite accept the prevailing opinions, although none came forward with a solution of the problem. From the nature of the task, we know now that it was too difficult for any individual researcher to accomplish in a short time, especially during the distraction of a controversy. The proofs were cryptic and were hidden too deeply behind a smokescreen of false history and myth to be easily discovered. It required time to analyze and examine the evidence and to sift the true from the false. This we have been able to do with the aid of those who have gone before us. However, the whole controversy served to arouse an intensified interest, such as has been awakened among scholars and thinkers everywhere in the Great Pyramid. This companion piece of the Bible, the one in art, the other in literature. The Bible is the Word in script. The Great Pyramid is the Word in stone, and both came from the same source, the Irish Magian priesthood of 𝗂𝗍. The interest in this great structure has been stimulated, especially during the last 50 years, since the increase of travel and the wide circulation of books and the descriptions of travelers. Through this means has interest been kept alive and a desire to know the history and secrets concerning those most curious and mysterious monuments of the past to which we are heirs. The fact that the solution of the problem of the pyramids was not given out to the world before now is no proof in itself that this knowledge did not exist. It is my belief that it was always known and in the possession of the ruling spirits of the Church of Rome and the high priests of the Church of England. The success of the former institution was dependent upon the suppression of this knowledge, but it was, and it is up to this day, also one of the most jealously guarded secrets of the High Church of England. Otherwise, this knowledge could not be but widely known, as the evidence is so plain that it is only through a studied and agreed upon silence that the facts have been kept from becoming common knowledge. The Great Pyramid and the group of which it is the premier, together with the temples of the Nile Valley, are the most convincing witnesses and testimonials, offering no chance for contradiction or uncertainty as to the accomplishments and genius of the Irish, or, as it is called in history, the Aryan race. In their great missionary pilgrimage, they circled the globe in order to give religion and a knowledge of God to the different races of mankind. They also established priesthoods and gave alphabets to the races who were unenlightened in such matters up to that time. Ireland is the country in which the arts and sciences were first discovered and developed. To this country the Greeks applied the term ogygia, a term which was never given but to the very ancient. And it is from the Irish, or Aryans, that the Greeks traced their descent, from Donnelly's Atlantis, page 458. To the Irish Magi we owe the discovery of fire and the common grains which they developed from the grasses. They were the first people to practice agriculture. They invented the common tools of workmanship, which have come down to us practically unchanged from those ancient times. There is no mistaking the monuments left by the Irish, who were once the rulers and masters of the whole earth. Their rule embraced all countries. It was worldwide. Ireland was the first mistress of the seas. It was the first and only worldwide empire which has ever been known. For it was spiritual. It was greater in extent than Persian, Greek, Roman, or Mogul ever attained to. The remains of their works, wherever they are found, bear an unmistakable similarity in shape and character. They are huge, immense, and conceived and carried out on a plan so extensive that it awes the mind of the man of today. These remains extend from Ireland, along the Atlantic coast of Europe to Africa, along the Mediterranean Sea to Egypt, India, China, Java, Tahiti, and the Caroline Islands in the South Pacific Ocean. On the American continent, we find the Round Tower near Newport, Rhode Island, which bespeaks its Irish origin, and the great pyramidal mounds of the Ohio and Mississippi valleys. Also the ruined temples of Yucatan and Mexico, and similar remains in South America, are all evidences of their handiwork. All owe their origin to the same source, and they establish beyond any doubt that the Irish were the first real discoverers of America, and that they established civilization on this western continent. It was tradition founded on the fact which gave hope and encouragement to later adventurers. The very name of God among the Indians of our country was an Irish name derived from those missionaries and explorers centuries before Christopher Columbus or Eric the Red were born. One of the Irish names of God is Man, and Manitha is the Irish word for holy. The Indian name for God was Manitou, the Holy One. The Indians also had another name for God, and this again was Irish. It was Manabasha, the sun god. It is a compound word with the root word man, holy, and basha, of the cows, the bull, virtually the same as Baal, the Irish sun god. So, the name signifies the holy life giver, or holy creator. Anyone who knows the Celtic tongue will recognize this fact at once, and so will all competent students of philology. No one, after reading this treatise on the Great Pyramid, will ever have a doubt as to who its authors were or as to whether the high personages in England, who always have assumed direction of the ship of state, have had a knowledge of who the builders of the Great Pyramid were. Nor will there be any doubt but that the ruling spirits of the Church of Rome have had this knowledge and that they still keep it a close secret. It is high time that this knowledge be given to the world and responsibility for its suppression be placed where it belongs. There has been maintained a smoke screen around Ireland since the English invasion and the consequent looting of the island, with the destruction of her sacred shrines, which was meant to obscure her great past and her contribution to letters, science, culture, true religion, and civilization. It goes without saying that we owe more to ancient EIRE for these blessings than to any other people or nation. Chapter 2. An Elucidation of History. In ancient times, the ruler of the state, according to the extent of his power, dependent as to whether he was an overlord king, having subject kings as vassals, or being a subject king himself, held two offices jointly in his own person, that of king or emperor, and that of head of the church in his dominion. The fact of his holding such autocratic power led to the assumption of attributes of divinity in order to hold the people in awe of him. The qualities of divinity we have seen attributed to rulers in our day. In Russia, China, Japan, and not so long ago in England, the belief was held that any disease which would not yield to the treatment of a physician could be cured by a mere touch of the king's hand, or even of his garment. The head of the Irish state church held this supreme pontifical power in Europe until challenged first by Persia, then by Greece, and later by Rome, who, when a favorable time arrived for her to assert her independence, set up jointly a church and state for herself. For let it be known, Rome was at one time a colony of Ireland. The name Rome is a compound of two Irish words, ro, meaning before, and om, meaning body, earth, or grave. But in its mythic meaning it is made to signify before heaven, ro, and earth, orn, the two together meaning heaven and earth, hence the eternal city of Rome. The river of Rome, the Tiber, also bears an Irish name. It derives its name from tubber, the Irish word for a well or spring of water. Hence the Tiber is the spring water river. As the poet Longfellow truly says, "Their names are on your waters, and ye may not wash them out." The fact is that Ireland was the first power that colonized along both sides of the Mediterranean Sea, and therefore the colonies came from the west instead of from the east, as our astute Roman and British historians would have us believe, and the world has believed it up to now. But the deception, when once exposed, is too clear for anyone to be deceived by it. Investigators have followed the false clues sent out from this source and found nothing in the East to support this claim that the Aryans emigrated from the East and colonized towards the West. The real and true evidence points just in the opposite direction. The American Encyclopedia Art Ethnology, quoted in Donnelly's Atlantis, says, Bonfrey, L. Geiger, and other students of the ancient Indo-European languages have recently advanced the opinion that the original home of Indo-European races must be sought in Europe because their stock of words is rich in the names of plants and animals and contains names of seasons that are not found in tropical countries or anywhere else in Asia. Muller says, the nations who are comprehended under the common appellation of Indo-European, the Hindus, the Persians, the Celts, Germans, Romans, Greeks, and Slavs, do not only share the same words and the same grammar, slightly modified in each country, but they seem to have likewise preserved a mass of popular traditions which had grown up before they left their common home. Donnelly's Atlantis, page 458. To obscure knowledge of this homeland and the reason for so doing have engaged the greatest organized propaganda for spreading misinformation that we have any knowledge of, as will become apparent in these pages. We are told that the Phoenicians planted those colonies and that they came from the east, from the coasts of what is now Syria, or Phoenicia as they say it was formerly called. Ireland is the homeland of the so-called Phoenicians, which word is a secret name for the insular race of mariners and traders who carried on commerce with the whole world. Sidon and Tyre are mythic names applied for purpose of deception to the two cities at the eastern end of the Mediterranean Sea. Sidon is an Irish word and means the hips or buttocks. Tyre means the earth or body, and the purple color or dye which, we are told, made the city famous is the blood which courses through the body. The coast of Syria was never suited to the needs of a seafaring race, such as a race never developed there. But Ireland, an island indented with bays, lofts, and harbors, was suitable to the development of just such a race as we should expect to find there. For secret reasons, the name Phoenicians was applied to the Irish race. It is written purposely in this form of spelling, which has served well in throwing people off the track and helped very well in keeping up the deception. If they had written the word in its plain form of Phoenician, that is F-I-N-I-C-I-A-N, there would be too many who were liable to see the true meaning of it and thereby get a clue to the real truth which was meant to be concealed. The word Fion or Finn is an Irish name of the sun, and the Phoenicians were the Irish sun worshippers or the Magian priests of 𝗖𝗵𝗽𝗁, the Irish sun god, who brought their civilization and arts already developed in Ireland with them to Egypt. There they erected their monumental altars to the god of the sun, of which the Great Pyramid was the crowning symbol and masterpiece. They carried their mission from there to the farther lands of the East. Plain documentary evidence of the ordinary kind to prove these facts has been destroyed, but in their stead a secret system was adopted to preserve them, or rather to conceal them from profane eyes, so that the facts can be attested to and proved in the most convincing manner by the aid of the covert or hidden allusions and by the secret code intended solely for the benefit of the anointed few, the priesthood. But those monuments which they left behind, although now in ruins from Vandal hands, speak most eloquently for them. They testify in most emphatic and convincing manner as to who their authors were. Their testimony is most pronounced and unimpeachable and puts to flight all false witnesses. The Great Pyramid of 𝗖𝗵𝗽, the Bible, and the Irish language, through means of these aids, we have been able to reveal the truth which had been buried beneath a mass of myth and fiction by the priests of Rome and their British collaborators. Honest, and we believe impartial, investigators have confessed themselves at a loss to account for the origin of Egypt's civilization with its arts and sciences. It did not seem like other things. There was such silence about it, and a mysterious absence of facts regarding its birth, which was most puzzling. It did not appear to grow from small beginnings and gradually advance to a better and more perfect state by successive stages. It seemed as if it was so from the beginning. No trace of early beginnings could be found by investigators. Now, these are not the natural or usual features of a civilization which is native to any country or society. Such a civilization as Egypt had could not be developed suddenly and come into being at once any more than an oak tree could spring from the acorn full grown, or that a great city could be naturally developed with all its varied institutions and arise in a single day. Many writers have noted this peculiarity about Egypt's history and her civilization without happening on to the key which would solve the puzzle. As they were not aware of the existence of a plot to conceal her history, they were not suspicious enough of the priests who wrote her history as they would have us see it. Renan says of Egypt, "It has no archaic epoch." Donnelly says, "The carpenters and masons of the ancient Egyptians were almost identical with those used among us today." Taylor says in Anthropology, page 192, "Among the ancient cultured nations of Egypt and Assyria, handicrafts had already come to a stage which could only have been reached by thousands of years of progress. In museums still may be examined the work of their joiners, stone cutters, goldsmiths, wonderful in skill and finish, and often putting to shame the modern artificer." Osborne says, "It bursts upon us at once in the flower of its highest perfection." Dr. Sayce says in A Miracle in Stone, page 40, "It suddenly takes its place in the world in all its matchless magnificence, without father, without mother, and as clean apart from all evolution as if it had dropped from the unknown heavens." We have already stated where it came from, Ireland and its master adepts. Reginald Stuart Poole says in Contemporary Review, August 1881, page 43, quoted by Donnelly, "When we consider the high ideal of the Egyptians as proved by their portrayals of a just life, the principles they lay down as the basis of ethics, the elevation of women among them, their humanity in war, we must admit that their normal place ranks very high among the nations of antiquity. They were just such a people as we would expect to find associated with and benignantly ruled by a pure and virtuous priesthood, such as the Irish Magian priesthood undoubtedly was, else its priests would not have been chosen to be the instructors and elder brothers of the infant and backward races of that early day." Rawlinson in Origin of Nations, page 13, says, "Now in Egypt it is notorious that there is no indication of any early period of savagery or barbarism. All the authorities show that, however far back we go, we find in Egypt no rude or uncivilized time out of which civilization is developed. We see no barbarous customs, not even the habit, so slowly abandoned by all people, of wearing arms when not on military service. By their fruits shall ye know them." Goodrich says, "Great and splendid as are the things which we know about oldest Egypt, she is made 1,000 times more sublime by our uncertainty as to the limits of her accomplishments. The effect of research seems to be to prove the objects of it to be much older than we thought them to be, some things thought to be wholly modern having been proved to be repetitions of things Egyptian, and other things known to have been Egyptian being, by every advance in knowledge, carried back more and more toward the beginning of things. She shakes our most rooted ideas concerning the world's history. She has not ceased to be a puzzle and a lure. There is a spell over her still." A lure she certainly is, for her monumental ruins are most interesting, and once we have the key to the mystery of her past, most enlightening and inspiring. But her spell of mysterious silence is now over, and her puzzle is explained in these pages for the first time, and now that we have shown the way, the task will be taken up and brought to completion by more able men. So, the generally accepted history of ancient times, such as is found on the shelves of our libraries and taught in our schools, is mostly fiction made up of fables and myths cleverly composed into history so nicely as to lull all suspicion in the mind of the reader or student as to the fraudulent character of it. Some wonderfully clever writers have been led astray by those deceptions of history. That this is a fact goes without saying. To make it clear, we will give an elucidation of the causes which were back of this gross deception and the means employed in carrying it out. Chapter 3. Struggle between Rome and ERA. The greatest and most prolonged struggle in ancient times that we have any account of or reliable tradition of was the war between Rome and Ireland, whose name at that time was ERA. We are told by the priests that it was Scotia, from Scoth, choice, select, which is only a mythical name alluding to her Magian adepts, or Hebrew priests of the sun. It was only after she was sacked and destroyed and her sacred altars laid in ruins by the English invaders at the instigation of Rome that the English priests gave her the name of Ireland from Ir, the end or finish. So when they finished their foul work of destruction, the English priests of Rome called her Ireland. The Irish Roman Catholic writers tell their people that Ir was one of her old poetic names, that is rubbish and false. The above is the truth, and it stands. No more either did Tara, the most sacred place on this earth for thousands of years for the whole Aryan race, have its name changed to New Grange, just for a whim. It was changed, like so many other Irish names of places, in order that, in the course of time, all memory of its great and important distinction of being the capital of the Lord of the Isles of the Western Sea, Earth's supreme pontiff, might be forgotten. See When the World Will End by Reverend Joseph Wilde. Even in faraway India, the island was known as Hiranya, from Era or Erin, the Isle of the Sun, that is, implying the home of the sun worship and the seat of the great Magian pontiff, the sun's chief representative on earth. Ireland is the great motherland of the Aryan race and the fictitious and fabled Atlantis of Plato. She has suffered too long from the scourge of the invading despoiler. Happily, there is a higher and more enlightened sentiment prevailing in Britain today which will bring about a better understanding between the two peoples. It is only when the two nations can meet on equal terms that a friendly and harmonious feeling can be cultivated and exist between them. It is no part of my purpose to add to troubles that are on the way to be amicably settled, but for the sake of establishing the truth, and without bias, I must explain the part which Britain has taken in the past in destroying and obscuring Ireland's history, and also her religious institutions, for the profit of Rome. Although England has also profited by the conquest of the island, it has not been all clear gain, and there have been many occasions since when she has repented the help given to Rome. We are glad to note there exists in the world today a growing conscience which taboos piracy and cruel, bloody conquest, along with disregard for the rights of smaller nations. There have been many seemingly strange upsets in the destiny of nations, one of which is the reversal of position in the case of England and Ireland. It is a fact, nevertheless, that England is the child or offspring of Ireland, and was a nursling, so to speak, at the breast of this once great mother, whom she has now persecuted and oppressed for more than 700 years. It is a fact, nevertheless, that England is the child or offspring of Ireland, and was a nursling, so to speak, at the breast of this once great mother, whom she has now persecuted and oppressed for more than 700 years. Let us hope that a better and brighter day is at hand for both Era and England. The peoples of those islands, as will be shown, are fundamentally of the one Celtic stock. The great struggle before mentioned, known as the Punic Wars, are said to have been waged by Rome against Carthage. This fact is only a partial and misleading statement, meant to deceive and which has deceived up to this day. Carthage was an Irish colony, and the name is a mythical one, a compound Irish word, and alludes to man's besetting sin, sexuality. Philologists have found a striking similarity between Berber and Irish words, even in our own day. The Carthaginian phase was only a part of the struggle. The wars in Gaul and Spain were for the same purpose, namely, to destroy the Irish Church, and to set up a universal church and papacy in Rome through the medium of which Rome could rule the entire world. The cause of these wars was said to have been due to the commercial rivalry between Rome and Carthage. This was only incidental to the major purpose stated above. After a struggle lasting for centuries, Rome finally, with the aid of England, succeeded in destroying the Irish Church and papacy, but she has so far fallen short of ruling the entire world. This ambition of Rome came to a head and took on new vigor when a council of the churchmen was called by the Roman Emperor Constantine and assembled at Nice in the year 325 of our era, known in history as the Council of Nice. Those men knew what the Great Pyramid represented and what it was associated with, and our belief is that it was their purpose to destroy it, as they did so many of the great temples and monuments of the earlier church. They did not want to leave standing so much visible evidence of the existence of the former religious institution, which they were going to displace with a new one of their own making. So, in every age since, the leaders of the Roman Church have had a conscious knowledge of the part played by their organization in the suppression of all knowledge concerning the history of the Great Pyramid, the purpose for which it was built, and who the builders were. Those astute political priests knew that silence on such matters was the most efficacious way to have them forgotten, and by absorbing the older church and papacy in a few generations there would be none left among the people who would know anything about such matters. Therefore the clerical writers have left us an account that is full of falsehood and invention, such as the invasion of the Vandals in Europe in order to account for the destruction of churches and monasteries, as well as the property of the outraged inhabitants who resisted despoliation and violence at the hands of the church forces. We believe that this destruction was carried out by the organized Vandals of the new church, worked up into a state of fanatical zeal by the clergy, and what property of the old church they spared was taken over and appropriated, the temples being given new names by the usurpers and used as churches. Through this campaign of destruction and silence, bolstered up by a false history, Rome figured that none would ever know of the part she played in the undermining of the great Irish church or the religion of 𝗖𝗍𝗍. 𝗖𝗍𝗍 was the Irish symbolical savior, crucified on the cross, and from him Rome got her savior, Jesu, substituting the letter J for I. It is translated into the English language as Jesus. It was the worship of 𝗖𝗍𝗍 more than any other religion that prevailed among the people of Europe at the time the Church of Rome began her mission to plunge the world into ignorance and darkness in order that mankind might forget all of the past. Her intention, no doubt, was to destroy all evidence, and she thought she had succeeded well in doing so, by which men in future ages might be able to refute the false and absurd statements which she has given out regarding the source from which she got her Savior Jesus and the Bible. She appropriated them from the Irish, and to cover up this fact, committed the most heinous and awful crimes against mankind. They were crimes which involved persecutions, slaughter, and untold suffering, the misery and effects of which have remained with us to this day. All this was done in order that she could have power and foist upon the world a savior and a scripture that, taken bodily from the ancient Irish religion and worship. The so-called Hebrew Bible did not come from any people distinctly known in history as the Hebrews, for there never was such a people. The name Hebrew is derived from 𝗵𝗵𝗽, from Ea, fire, an Irish name of the sun. Meleagus is the personified sun, the father of the Irish race in Irish history, and 𝗵𝗵𝗽 is his brother. Therefore, he is also a personified attribute of the sun. So, a Hebrew is a priest of the fire and a disciple of the sun. It is a secret name for the ancient Irish priests of 𝗖𝗍𝗍. It is one of the names by which the church conspirators have camouflaged the ancient Irish priesthood, and by placing the theater of their history and existence over in Palestine, they have up to this day succeeded in making fools of investigators and scholars. So, the Christian Bible did not come from India or from Greece or from Persia or from Palestine, but direct from Ireland and its great master priesthood of 𝗖𝗍𝗍. It has been subjected to many additions and alterations both by Roman and by English churchmen, behind closed and locked doors, by men pledged to secrecy regarding the things discussed and the manner in which they were to be interpreted and presented to us. The mind of the general reader has been so thoroughly saturated with false information on this and kindred subjects that this digression is necessary to make clear the motives and the course pursued by the Roman papacy, aided by by the hierarchy of Britain, which was a part of the Roman Church, to make the substitution of the Irish Saviour Iesu and the Bible possible. In furtherance of that object, it may be said that to the Church of Rome more than all else can be ascribed the national misfortunes of the Irish race, and owing to lack of knowledge of the true cause of their downfall, the latter-day children of the Gael, fair, white, bright, the sun, through the influence and organization of the priests, unwittingly are supporting the institution that dealt Ireland her death blow. Rome was her implacable enemy for centuries. She was her nemesis. She raised up enemies against Ireland wherever she could. In the beginning of a later period of history, England was the handmaid of the Roman Church. But in more recent times, the relationship became reversed, and Rome, instead of being the open and avowed enemy, acted as the secret and insidious auxiliary of England in suppressing the aspirations of the Irish people towards realizing the national consciousness for self-government and independence, which was never extinguished in the hearts of the people. The leaders of the Roman, as well as those of the English High Church, are yet conscious that the star Leviticus still sheds its spiritual influence over the sacred isle, and that it is the homeland of the Bible, and that from the select of that people were the Levites, from lam, Lamh, a hand, signifying the artificer, the disciple or priest of the sun. Hence the symbolic lavdarg, the red hand of Ulster. This was a spiritual symbol and was used as an insignia of the House of Tyrone. It has never been compatible with the interests of the Roman papacy to act otherwise in our day than as a secret enemy, considering the part which it had taken in aiding Britain in destroying first the independence of the Irish nation as a political and commercial power, and second in her suppression and absorption of the national Irish Church, which, up to that time, the year 1169 of our era, had never before been under the sway of Rome, but was, of itself, the greatest church in the world, independent, and once the great mother church of all who worshipped the true and living God. Up to the middle of the first century of our era, it was the most widespread church in all Europe and the Western world. The conquest and absorption of this great church was the constant aim and ambition of the Roman emperors. Under the lead of the papacy, it required centuries to bring it about. It was for this purpose that England was invaded by the Roman arms, in order to strike a vital blow at Ireland, which was the seat of power in those islands. England and Scotland had known no other rule up to this time. The Irish Pope and King was the sovereign lord who ruled from his capital at Tara, and his rule never had been supplanted or displaced in those islands up to this event. It is amusing to see what lapses of memory and what omissions the English and Romanist writers and chroniclers have had and displayed in trying to dodge this most transparent and unacknowledged fact. In order to avoid mentioning it, they have to gloss it over and ignore it, or throw a hazy and uncertain atmosphere about this part of the early history of Britain. There is one very plain fact which stands out before the student and investigator, and that is that Ireland was the homeland of the Scotic race, that it was from there that those islands were ruled, and that it was this power that Rome had to contend with when she invaded Britain. This fact is omitted by the English church writers because to mention it would need explanations and might show the reason for the Roman invasion. With an amazing inconsistency, they endeavor to show that the Irish made their initial conquests in Britain as late as about the year 240 AD. Of course, this is plainly not so, for at this time the Irish power is on the decline. At this period, the Irish are not making any new conquests, but striving to hold on to what they have always been in possession of against the Roman invaders. We find them occupying not only the south and west parts of Britain, but also the east and Cornwall. And what there were of the Scots, or Irish, there at this time was a people converted into the status of a garrison, mostly on the defensive in the east of Britain and in Cornwall. In the west and north, as well as in the southwest, they were unconquered. So instead of this being the beginning of the Scotic power in Britain, as they would have us believe, it was the declining period. They were approaching the end of their long reign in that country, which was ended in the west and north of Britain only long after the invasion of the Jutes and Saxons. Even these barbarians, in time, yielded to Irish culture, which still remained the greatest intellectual leaven in the island and became civilized. Brilliant Irish monks and scholars kept this culture alive, and during the 8th, 9th, and 10th centuries, many of them were engaged as teachers and instructors in the establishments of Saxon princes in Britain. This was a growing cause of alarm at Rome. So the Irish were the original people of those islands. These are the facts which seem to escape British writers, but somehow they find no difficulty in inventing fables to bolster up any supposition which they wish to advance and to give it the color of history. Rome brought the war to Britain because it was the territory which was occupied and ruled over by the Irish Pope King, and it was to crush this church power that his territory of Britain was invaded. To obtain the coveted prize of the popedom, which was held by the Irish rulers, was the great ambition which the emperors or heads of the Roman state church sought to accomplish. There is no doubt whatever but that it was for the purpose of bringing this about that the Danes and the Norwegians were induced to make raids upon and attack the Scots, both in Ireland and Scotland and the islands of the surrounding seas. Later they raided both Roman and Celt alike, as the motive was either plunder or conquest. We are satisfied that Rome did not stop at employing any means she could find to carry out her ends. By their character ye shall know them. We find the Danes and Northmen attacking Ireland in the first half of the 9th century, and no doubt they did effect establishments in some of the seaports, like Dublin and Waterford. Although they came as foes, in time many of them became assimilated with the Irish population, but the constant urge of Rome kept bringing them on from time to time. For the next 100 years, fresh hordes of Vikings came until their final defeat at Clontarf in the year 1014 AD. In the years 991 to 994, we find Olaf Tryggvason in England. We are told that he was there converted to Christianity, or, in other words, he became an avowed partisan of Rome. We immediately again find him in Ireland at war with the Irish. He left Dublin to become King of Norway in 995 AD, and to make good his espousal of the Roman cause, he forced his people by the terror of the sword to embrace Romanism, or the so-called Christianity. A writer, evidently a churchman, in the Encyclopedia Britannica, page 556, Art Norway, in an apologetical vein, says of this exemplifier of Roman methods of proselytizing, he had been baptized sometime during his English expedition and had taken up Christianity in a more serious manner than was generally the case with the northern converts of his class, who as a rule submitted to baptism as a convenient or necessary transaction. Olaf's Christianity does not appear to have been of a very deep or enlightened type, but he was thoroughly in earnest about it, and set himself to enforce its supremacy with the whole energy of his character. And in an incredibly short time, if he had not exactly succeeded in making his subjects Christian, he had, at least, made it very unsafe for them to be anything else. By force or gifts, by persuasion, or even by torture if necessary, for his anger was sometimes cruel enough, he soon scarcely left a man of note unbaptized in Norway. End quote. Now, I should say that this Olaf was a very apt convert, and that he imbibed the spirit of Roman Christianity according to example and precedent. He evidently understood the meaning of his own mission to Ireland as an ally of Rome, and he surely took his baptism and his lesson well, despite the faint praise of this cleric, who seems on the whole pleased with the work he accomplished. Any bishop would be. He says further, Perhaps the strangest thing is not merely that he attained his end so rapidly, but that he did so without rousing and alienating the people. His splendid personal appearance, his wonderful strength and his skill in arms, his inexhaustible courage and energy, and the frank, chivalrous nature, bright and joyous when in quiet, but capable of terrible passion when enraged, seem to have attracted everyone at the time. This writer stresses exceedingly in trying to portray this fiend and ruffian in qualities which might make him acceptable to anyone worthy to be called human. There was a very good and sufficient reason why the people were attracted to him, because they were in his power. We read of him in Bible Myths, T.W. Doane, page 449. Even among the Norwegians, the Christian sword was unsheathed. They clung tenaciously to the worship of their forefathers, and numbers of them died real martyrs for their faith. They're suffering the most cruel torments from their persecutors. It was by sheer compulsion that the Norwegians embraced Christianity. The reign of Olaf Tryggvason, a Christian king of Norway, was in fact entirely devoted to the propagation of the new faith, by means most revolting to humanity. His general practice was to enter a district at the head of a formidable force, summon a thing, an assembly or congress of the freemen, and give the people the alternative of fighting with him or of being baptized. Most of them, of course, preferred baptism to the risk of a battle with an adversary so well prepared for combat, and the recusants were tortured to death with fiend-like ferocity and their estates confiscated. End quote. This explains why the people were not alienated from this Roman apostle, despite the apology of his clerical admirer and eulogist. Thus is shown the purpose and the object of Norse and Danish incursions into Ireland. Priestly fictions and inventions have had their day, and it would be too bad indeed if such silly falsehoods as have heretofore been accepted should forever, as they were intended and expected to do, prevent mankind from getting a true and clear insight into the motives which were back of those invasions and which led up to those historic occurrences. The motives are, as shown, most obvious, and enlightened men accept and acknowledge them. These writers serve up a myth as history, which contains an idea cloaked or hidden for the express purpose of deceiving the people as a whole. Here is an example. It is from English history, as written by the priests, and shows the way in which they have blinded the people and kept the truth under cover for their own benefit. In English history, we are told that after the Roman forces were withdrawn from Britain, the country was overrun by the Scots and Picts, and that a British prince or duke by the name of Vortigern invited the German tribes to come in and take possession of the country. The Angles, Saxons, and Jutes came under the leadership of the two brothers, Hengist and Horsa. We are told that warfare ensued for about 40 years. Of the two brothers, Horsa was killed in a battle with Vortigern. After this happens, Hengist and his son, 𝗖𝗵𝗽𝗁, seized the royal purple and became kings. A writer of the history topic, England, in the Encyclopaedia Britannica, 9th edition, page 269, very naively says, quote, "In all this there is nothing like romance. It is a matter-of-fact kind of history, which might be preserved by a runic chronicle, which might almost be preserved by tradition." End quote. It is not quite so straightforward and simple a tale as he would have us believe, and it was not meant to be, as we will show in what follows. Vortigern is a Celtic or Irish word with the first syllable inflected. It is an alteration of the word Morthiarna. The T is silent and M is inflected, as is common in the Celtic, and is given the sound of V. The word is phonetically pronounced Voragirn, and signifies a great lord, a prince, or ruler. The 40 years in which the warfare is said to go on is the sacred number, 40, the term of years in each incarnation or life, in which a religious man is theoretically in a battle with himself to overcome his lower nature, his passions and desires. Hengist is formulated from the Celtic word ong, a name of the sun, and personified it as it is here. It signifies a worshipper of the sun, a leader, a bishop. In ancient Irish mythical lore, the sun is said to have a charioteer or horseman. The Celtic word for horse is 𝗂𝗵𝗿𝗃, hence 𝗂𝗵𝗿𝗀𝗀, the valiant man of deeds, anglicized as Hector. In this myth, he is presented to us very nicely disguised in English dress, so that you do not quite recognize him as 𝗤rsa, also a priest of the sun, who is also a leader and a bishop. 𝗖𝗵𝗿 is an abbreviation of the Irish word 𝗬𝗏𝗏. It is the name of an order or degree of the ancient Irish priesthood of 𝗖𝗼𝗍, and it is the name word for bishop. So we are informed, under a heavy layer of covering, that 𝗖𝗵𝗿 was a bishop also and a spiritual leader of the invading horde to rob and slay the people of Britain in order to enable the Roman Church to maintain the foothold it had secured and was about to lose. In the covert language of the myth, the high priest, hierophant, or demigod, is always a prince, duke, lord, or nobleman. The facts of this bit of mythical history, to state it in an open manner, is that the head of the Roman Church in Britain, carrying out the instructions of his master in Rome, instigated the two German tribes to invade England under the leadership of their two bishops, of whom 𝗤rsa was slain in battle, and Hengist and 𝗖𝗵𝗿, the successor of 𝗤rsa, more fortunately survived. In time they grasped royal power and became kings. The truth about the invasion is that there were only two German tribes as such engaged in it, though there is no doubt but that there were many adventurers encouraged to join with them in the undertaking through the persuasion of Roman emissary priests. These two tribes were the Jutes and Saxons. The so-called tribe of Angles is a fiction invented by Anglophile writers of a later day. It is part of a plot to obscure the Celtic or Gaelic element, which is the greatest in the composition of the English race, and to unduly emphasize the German element, which is comparatively small and almost non-existent today, with the exception of some of the nobility in the reigning family. This bias was very pronounced during the reign of Queen Victoria. The fact that her consort was a German prince gave added impetus to propaganda, which had already been long enforced to suppress or belittle everything of Celtic cultural nature. So it became popular to claim that whatever was of excellence in English life was due to the German element in the race. This false impression was helped to become fixed in the popular mind by just such invention of spurious history and by giving out false accounts regarding events of the past, such as the story of the Angles being a German tribe. The false impression was purposely made upon the mind of the English people that the term Anglo-Saxon meant that they were a race of German descent. This is a delusion which has been diligently fostered. The propagation of this fiction came to a sudden stop when the World War began. But since the war, the same propaganda, the same systematic falsehood and misrepresentation has been in evidence. It has found a voice through our American press. I took the matter up in a letter, the salient points of which I here give, which I sent to a leading newspaper. The letter was published under the caption, "Says English are Celtic in blood as well as in speech." This statement was so apparently so radically at variance with the claims of the propagandists that it might well be expected to bring forth a reply, or that an attempt at contradiction would be made, if possible. No reply came because the propagandists might well have considered that it was a dangerous subject, and the more discussion it received, the greater would be the exposure of the false history which has been so extensively written and circulated. The letter, in part, is as follows. Sir, in a recent issue, I read the statement that Celtic hardly exists in the English language and still less in the English blood. I wish to refute this statement. It is absolutely false. The basis of the English speech is undeniably Celtic, and it cannot very well be eradicated without destroying the English language. Any person laying the least claim to scholarship should know that fact. The above-quoted statement savors very much of the fashion in vogue with English writers of the Victorian era to eschew everything Celtic and claim affinity with the German cousin. But the rough handling the British troops received at the Battle of Mons and subsequently opened the eyes of the English people to the true fact that Celtic blood was the basis of the English race. Now that the war is over, the same evil tactics of division and dissension are being employed to keep the English and the Irish peoples apart by means of hatred and animosity, as if there were nothing of kinship between them of old. The common people of Ireland and England never had a quarrel with one another. Dean Swift, a Protestant of Dublin, tried to get the Irish people to compose their differences by citing a case such as this to them. Why should men quarrel because one wanted his eggs boiled soft and the other wanted his boiled hard? No real cause for a quarrel. I'm glad to see the growing union of political sentiment between the Irish representatives and the Labour Party of England, which represents the democratic and progressive elements of the English people. I feel that they are, for the best good of all, determined to give justice to Ireland in order that friendship and mutual confidence may exist where formerly hatred and mistrust prevailed. I would advise our English, Irish, and Scottish brothers to look askance at anybody who would try to sow seeds of dissension among them. Now, as to whether there is any Celtic in the English language, let me cite just a few well-beloved words of common, everyday English speech. We will take first the English word all. Its root derivation is Celtic and means universal, great, mighty, a race, a generation, all. Next, take altitude. The root of this word is the Celtic word alt, meaning a high place or eminence. Then, the English word river. The root of it is the Celtic word ri, meaning to run, ria, running. Hence our name for a brook, a run. Another Celtic name for river is Avon. Hence, by corruption of English pronunciation, we have Stratford-on-Avon, that is, Stratford-on-River, Shakespeare's home. Then take London. The name is Celtic and is a compound of two Celtic words, lan, strong, and dun, a fort or city, hence London, strong city. Next, the English word lion, a word dear to every Englishman. The root of it is the Celtic word leo, meaning a limb, member, strength, hence lion. Latin leo is derived from the same source, as Latin is a daughter of the Celtic. The word rose is taken from the Celtic word ros, meaning bright, shining, pleasant, agreeable. The word red, the color of the English flag, is taken from the Celtic ru, or rot. The Germans also got the word from the same source. Then we come to the Englishman's sobriquet, John Bull. It is surely a Celtic word. It means the fructifier, the male principle. The Celtic word is bell. The Scottish call it bill, and the English bull. Now, dear sir, while the impulse is still strong to proceed further, I think that I have advanced enough of evidence to show the great Celtic foundation of English speech, that it is rooted in the Celtic mother tongue. It is the same with English blood. It is mostly Celtic. And while it is not my purpose to go into this at length, I will briefly say that while the English people were at different times inoculated with a strain of other blood, it has long since been eliminated. For it is the same with a race as it is with the earth itself. It reverts back to first principles. The tail cannot wag the dog. The English people have been able to assimilate every strain which has come among them, hence their virility. I will conclude in the words of Shakespeare, "There are stranger things in this world, Horatio, than you or I wot of." What is now called England was from time immemorial occupied by the Celtic or Gaelic race. In the Gaelic tongue, the name of the race is Angale, pronounced with the D silent, Angale, signifying the gale. This country, then, as a most natural consequence of the name of the race which occupied it, was known to the Germans as Angale land, or the country of the Gaels. The name has persisted and has never been changed except insofar as the corruption of English pronunciation has made the slight change phonetically from Angale land to Angle land, and finally to its modern form, England. The name is truly derived from its ancient race, the Gaels, in a most obvious and natural manner. So the term Anglo-Saxon, which a few have so ardently cultivated, has unwittingly served but to perpetuate the memory of Angale land's ancient people, while the covert purpose was to suppress all knowledge of this important fact. The fiction of the story of the Angles as being one of the invading tribes may be easily understood also by the fact that in the cryptic account given of the invasion, an account written by the priests, there were only 2 leaders or bishops mentioned, Hengist and 𝗿𝗳𝗁, one for each tribe. If there had been 3 tribes instead of 2, there would have been 3 bishops at their head to lead them, for it was always the bishop who assumed power and leadership. This fact is shown in the narrative that, on the death of Bishop 𝗿𝗳𝗁, his successor, Bishop 𝗖𝗵𝗿 and Bishop Hengist, grasped royal power and became kings. 𝗖𝗵𝗿 is called the son of Hengist, only in a religious sense, as he was created or made bishop by the latter, and hence is his son. This illustrates how little dependence can be placed on some of the history that has come down to us from the priests. It is most unreliable, and a great deal of it is pure falsehood and fable, especially that which has come to us from English and Roman writers. So we see the work of Rome in the Jute and Saxon invasion of England always pursuing the same object, the conquest and acquisition of the Irish Church. No one needs to entertain a doubt about this fact. Later on, when disputes arose in England between the Church and King, we find Pope Hildebrand urging William of Normandy to overthrow the English king, and in that way to strengthen his own power in that quarter, a thing very necessary to Rome. The result proved it so later in the reign of Henry II of England, who aided Rome to reach her long-sought goal, the conquest of Ireland, and the suppression and absorption of the Irish National Church of Iessa, its institutions, Savior, and Bible. Although Rome had grown great in power by the time that she invaded Britain, she still had a difficult struggle ahead of her. She found that the closer she came to Ireland, where the Irish were near their base of supplies, the more stubborn became the opposition. After a period of occupancy of 400 years or so, the invasion of England failed to bring Ireland and the Irish Church under her power. At about the latter part of the 4th century, disintegration within and invasion from without forced her to cease for the time her warfare on the Irish, Scots, and Picts, who are the same race from the north, and caused Rome to withdraw her forces from Britain, never to return as an armed state power. But the Roman Church had, in that period, become established in England. It got a firm foothold in the occupied territory. It had not yet spread to Wales or Scotland, but she had accomplished one part of her mission to destroy the Irish Church and thereby enable herself to set up a universal papacy in Rome. It remained for time and circumstance to enable her to accomplish the former. The latter ambition has never been fully realized. While the Irish nation was confronted with the menace of invasion and conquest by Roman armies, it remained united and invincible against the mightiest power on earth. Although the ranks of the population must have been pretty well depleted of material for military service after centuries of warfare, they succeeded in preserving their political and spiritual independence. They survived perhaps the longest period of continued military strain which any people of like numbers were ever subjected to. But with the removal of the menace of Roman invasion, reaction set in, and the relaxation from the necessities and rigors incident to constant war gave the people opportunity to apply themselves to the occupations of a peaceful life and to cultivate the arts and sciences which had been neglected, and many of which had no doubt been forgotten. They also cultivated the spiritual life which was in abeyance during the centuries of warfare. In the succeeding centuries, Ireland became again, as in former ages, the center of learning and the home of the sciences, which she was in the beginning before the first migration of the Irish or Aryan race towards the east, or the rising sun, for they were truly the children of light and knowledge. After the withdrawal of the Roman forces from Britain, it was the purpose of the Irish Pope, King, through the medium of the monastic orders, to spread knowledge and science throughout all the countries of Europe. But this was in direct conflict with the policy of Rome, which was to spread ignorance and darkness. She did not want the history of the past to be known. It would interfere with her purpose and defeat it. The Irish Church hoped to regain some of the lost ground after the withdrawal of the Roman armies from Britain, and eventually would have done so had not Rome succeeded in raising up new enemies against her. In the German tribes of the Jutes and Saxons she found willing allies. They were won over by Rome to invade England, as the spoils were enticing. Irish missionaries went again to the continent and endeavored to spread the light. John Donne, Scotus, the Irish were called Scots, founded a monastery and school at Ratisbon on the Danube. Many went to other places, but all to no purpose, as the opposition of Rome was too strong to overcome. The loot of the Irish Church was yet to be obtained. Later, we are told, some of them were received at the court of Charlemagne, for the Irish Pope was still the lord of the isles of the Western Sea. But the alluring inducements offered by Rome appealed more to Charlemagne's cupidity and ambition for power. And Charlemagne, being a politician, went with Rome and became emperor. He then embarked on a war of religious conquest with the sword against the Germans in order to force them to bow to the Roman Church yoke and relinquish their adherence to the Celtic Church. This practically put an end to any chance of success for the mission of the Irish monks on the continent. All who now wished for education and the higher learning had to go to Ireland for it, and thither they went by the thousands, and were welcomed. They were domiciled and given both food and tuition fee. This continued from the period shortly following the withdrawal of the Roman forces from England until the coming of the Danes and Northmen to Ireland. It was during this period of the revival of learning that the Irish masters are said to have laid the foundation of our modern university system, of which such great schools as Harvard, Yale, Columbia, Dartmouth, Cornell, and others are part. Let us give credit where credit is due. This was not the beginning, but only the renaissance of Irish learning on the continent of Europe, as British writers would have us believe. This is on par with their juggling of fact regarding the occupancy and rule of Britain by the Irish Pope kings previous to the Roman invasion. The Irish Magian priesthood had always had this great learning. It was handed down through a secret cult of adepts from time immemorial. It was this which enabled them to erect the immense and perfectly proportioned Great Pyramid of 𝗂𝗍. It should not be any surprise to us that learning fell into a state of decline during the great struggle with Rome. It could not very well be cultivated under such conditions, yet however much diminished, it was never extinguished. Had Ireland been a part of the continent of Europe instead of being an island, it might have been different, and this revival could not have taken place. We are all living witnesses of the great inroads which were made in the ranks of the undergraduates in our own colleges during 1 year and a half of warfare in the late World War. We may well ponder on what the conditions would have been if the war had continued for 10 or 20 years, to say nothing of several centuries of warfare. We all felt keenly the shortages in supplies and the scarcity of many articles of use, in which manufacture ceased owing to the fact that the nation's energy and manpower was being directed to the manufacture and production of the things that were used solely for the prosecution of the war. If this continued for a great length of time, we can easily see where many of the arts and sciences, in fact culture in general, would have been neglected and as a natural result forgotten. When we think what a comparatively small nation Ireland was in those days beside mighty Rome, we may well think it a miracle that learning did not perish from the island altogether. It is to this island we must look for the original source from which our learning and science came. Here is where it was first conceived, nurtured, and cultivated, and from here it spread throughout the entire world. Her sacred literature has been pilfered by Rome, and her learning and mythology handed over and accredited to Greece by these same English Romanist tricksters. In the mythology which they have stolen and handed over to Greece, they have covered up and secretly preserved, for their own knowledge, the very source from which it came. For, as the Greeks said, they knew not where their traditions came from, for they were strange to them. Of course they were strange, and are so yet, except to the knowing ones. The names of the gods and goddesses have been changed to some extent to suit the deception. For instance, Anna is the mother of the Irish gods, and we find her accredited to the Greeks with her temple at Ephesus, her statue that of a female figure crowned and with many breasts to suckle her children. She is presented as conceived and personified by the Irish priest philosophers as the many-breasted mother of the gods. She is the female principle of deity, the great mother which sustains all life. They made her over as Diana, god Anna, and Rome has stolen her and translated her into Saint Anne, the mother of Mary, from the Irish Mura, the sea, and the grandmother of Iesus, or Jesus. It is irrefutable. They have taken the Irish Hercules, the personified sun, from her, meaning above, and Q, meaning wolfhound or swift, the high swift one, and made him into Heracles. Under the guise of the myth, when this god goes to Ireland and places himself on Mount Abbas, Ab, a father or pope, and kills Geran, an Irish name of the sun and always connected with the sun worship, the Irish pope and father, representative of the sun and the head of his worshippers on earth, he steals cattle and brings them to Italy. Do we not here find a hidden allusion to the fact that the new Heracles took possession of the Irish papacy and the rest of the plunder he brought to Italy as cattle? The myth states that Hercules went to Erythea, an island somewhere in the remote west beyond the Pillars of Hercules, where was a giant named Geran, Irish Grean, the glowing aspect. When Hercules reached the island, he placed himself on Mount Abbas. Geran has cattle, which at night he keeps in a dark cave in the remote west. Hercules slays Geran and ships the cattle into the vessel of the sun, and landing them safely drives them through Iberia, Gaul, and across the Alps into Italy. From Murray's Manual of Mythology, page 292 through 293. Those writers do not mention the fact that Era was the island in the west and the home of sun worship referred to in the myth. Erythea is but a name for Era, under camouflage spelling. The root of the word is Lar, the west, the western isle, behind which the sun sets. The goddess Ciris is also Irish and means the earth. There is no letter K in the Celtic alphabet, and C has the sound of the English K. The word in Irish is pronounced Ciris, while in English it has the soft sound as Ciris. This difference in spelling and sound has been taken advantage of and utilized in carrying out the deception. We declare without fear of successful contradiction that Ireland is the homeland of these myths and the island alluded to in the west. Even Olympus, the seat of the Greek gods, is a compound Irish name with a Greek ending. It is formed by combining the words olim, a doctor or professor of science, and phys, wisdom, hence Mount Olympus. the mount of wisdom and the seat of the gods. For, of course, the gods are full of wisdom. This seat has been translated to Greece from Ireland. 𝗖𝗵𝗵𝗽𝗁 at Tara was Mount Olympus, or, as the name implies, the head or seat of wisdom, the supreme pope. It never was in Greece. The whole scheme is quite plain and clear when it is pointed out. The wonder is that somebody did not discover it before. Now, as it is all plain, especially to the scholar who can read and translate Irish and recognize its idioms, a new perspective appears before us. The name Tara implies the Father, and read it the other way, and it spells Arhat, a divine man. We are led to believe that this deception was well known to Lord Bacon, for he said, quote, "The mythology of the Greeks, which their oldest writers do not pretend to have invented, was no more than a light air which had passed from a more ancient people into the flutes of the Greeks, which they modulated to such descents as best suited their fancies." End quote. Atlantis, page 283. It is no surprise at all to us that a plot was hatched up against Bacon and that he was put to death. He gave out too much to be tolerated by unscrupulous and designing persons. Such candor and plain speaking was quite contrary to the purpose of the English government and hierarchy, and such frankness, if not suppressed, would be fatal to the statecraft and policy of the men who were shaping England's future in that ambitious age. This may have been the cause of his being put to death, for he betrayed state secrets, although malfeasance in office was the charge made against him. However, we still see the successor of those men sitting in the House of Lords as my Lord Bishop, keeping in close touch with the British state. Ireland has been terribly mistreated through the selfishness of Rome and England. I hope that in this enlightened age, when the spirit of inquiry is broad in search of truth, that men and women will not let prejudice or preconceived ideas formed in the absence of fuller knowledge stand in the way of the acceptance of the truths herein stated, though called to their attention for the first time. It surely is time, in the name of righteousness, that justice be done, and, as far as possible, that the great wrong may be redressed by allowing the great Aryan Mother, metaphorically speaking, to arise to her feet and to set her own house in order. Scholars and investigators have been very much led astray in the past by accepting as facts Roman and British fiction dressed up in the sober and matter-of-fact garb of history. Those inventors of history would have us direct our attention to any other country than to Ireland. Such complete silence on the part of the arch-conspirators surely did arouse a just suspicion, which upon investigation has yielded such splendid and most convincing proofs of the foulest plot in all human annals. This plot not only comprehended the pilfering of all of the appurtenances of the Irish Church of 𝗖𝗵𝗽𝗀, the Bible, Savior 𝗖𝗵𝗽, the Bible, Savior 𝗖𝗵𝗽, Jesus, property and institutions, literature, etc., but also the suppression of the Irish language, and finally, the annihilation or dispersion of the race. We have been told through Roman and British sources that our learning came from some Asiatic country, perhaps Assyria, Persia, or Arabia, Greece, or Egypt itself. Any one of these countries would serve equally well the purpose of the arch-plotters who came so near to killing off the Irish race that only a small remnant of it was left to survive at one time. They were so reduced in numbers and circumstances that there was no thought in the minds of the English rulers of those days that they would ever again increase in numbers or advance in enlightenment to any extent, or at least ever be able to offer any serious resistance to the English rule in Ireland. The priests were employed in writing and concocting a false history, one that would not contain any mention of the nature of her former greatness, or the achievements and discoveries for which the whole civilized world is indebted to her. The very discoveries of the arts and sciences, credit for which discoveries would make any people great, were denied her in the new quote-unquote histories, and the credit has been given mainly to Greece, with other transfers already mentioned. But we say that it was in Ireland that our civilization arose, and that it was there that the cereals were developed from the grasses. It was on this island that barley was first grown, the grain that is particularly associated with the life of an abstemious priesthood. Here we find also the birthplace of mathematics, geometry, navigation, astronomy, medicine, chemistry, and the arts which are commonly called Egyptian. British lexicographers, and others taking their cue from them and giving the derivation of the word chemistry, refer us to Egyptian, Greek, Latin, or even a Dutch or German root for it. But Cleland, quoted in Webster's dictionary, derives it from the Celtic root word 𝗂𝗵, or chem, C-E-H-E-M, fire, which is the true derivation, as fire is the chemical agency in all nature. The Celtic master adepts established that science on its true basis. It was in Ireland that the sciences were brought to perfection, and the names under which this fact is masked, such as Egyptian, Chaldean, Phoenician, Cushite, Ethiopian, etc., are only names devised by the priests to deceive. This will be shown later on. Ireland in those days was the mistress of the seas and the great commercial and trading nation of the world. Her vessels and intrepid seamen visited the harbors and ports of every sea where trade and barter was carried on. See Donnelly's Atlantis. Atlantis is the name under which these plotters have sought to sink Ireland and bury her great past in the oblivion of the bed of the ocean. The name Atlantis was formulated for this very reason, and to secretly signify and commemorate her past. The word Atlantis signifies the illustrious land of wisdom. It is a compound Irish name composed of 3 words and justifiably applied to Ireland, but it has been done secretly by the British priests of Rome, as one may infer from the fact that they have this Isle of Atlantis lying at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. At means illustrious, lan means land or church, and tis means wisdom. It is a camouflaged name for the sacred island and the great Magian priesthood which was established there, whose ruler was at the head of all organized religion and the leader of all who worshipped the supreme deity. The deception practiced has been successful for a long time, but it could not last forever. The connection of the priest and myth at last became apparent, and the solution of the riddle of history was found, and the fiction is exposed. The people of this island discovered the mariner's compass and had it in use from remote ages. The story that the compass came from China, or that the Portuguese obtained it from Mohammedan sailors on the coast of Africa, is fictitious and is similar to other fictions which have been put into circulation by either credulous or very designing persons. Their voyages to Iceland alone is presumptive evidence sufficient to establish that fact, for in later times, when the first Northmen visited that distant island, they found evidence that Irish monks had been there long before. Their long voyages across the Atlantic Ocean to both North and South America is further presumptive evidence to confirm our belief in this fact. The voyages of those Phoenicians were not haphazard or dependent on a guess. The communication between Ireland and both Americas, North and South, was constant and sustained. The extensive and, for that time, highly advanced civilization which they established on both those continents amply warrants this belief. The remains of their works are in our own country, but much more so in Mexico, Yucatan, and South America. Investigation and research will prove the truth of these statements. The monuments still remaining in those countries are unmistakable proofs as to who their authors were. The existence of both Sphinx and pyramidal remains in Yucatan is not due to mere coincidence or chance. The art of music was developed by them and cultivated to a greater extent than in any other country. It was truly the homeland of music. The proof of this fact remains yet in evidence after centuries of more or less neglect in the fact that of the 34,000 tunes known in European music, a little more than 17,000 are of Irish origin. This fact of itself affords a most wonderful testimony for the psychologist and the thinker of the past accomplishments of this people in the art of music. It is the same with a race as it is with an individual. It requires time to develop any gift or art, and the fact that they still possess it to such a degree, after such a long period of national decadence and neglect, proves, by its being there in such wonderful measure, that it is the result of generations of past culture. Chapter 4. The Compact of Rome and England for the Conquest of Ireland. When Nicholas Breakspere, an Englishman, was elected Pope of the Roman Church in the year 1154 A.D., he issued a bull granting, without any right whatever, through pure presumption, a permit to King Henry II of England to invade and seize Ireland. The time was at hand for the Roman Church to achieve the second part of her mission, to acquire possession of the Church of 𝗂𝗵𝗽𝗁 through the conquest of the Irish nation. Although the Roman Empire had ceased to exist as formerly, its very soul was the Roman Church, which continued on with the same ambition, relentlessly pursuing its quarry, the conquest of the Irish Church and all it involved. By this time the power of the Church had grown to such an extent that the Roman Pope had assumed to exercise the prerogative of assent and dissent to whatever activities kings or princes might venture to engage in, all the more so as the Church was firmly established in the countries of Western Europe. But the papacy of the original Church of the one true God was yet to be crushed and its light extinguished before the Roman aspirant could plume himself as the supreme Pope. King Henry, on his part, for justification in the eyes of the world, and to appear to act on worthy authority with warranted right to enter upon a campaign of murder and spoliation against a friendly nation which had been guilty of no offense against his kingdom, proceeded to act on the Pope's permit and embark on the conquest. The Church, on its part, was not dilatory in setting in motion the means for the consummation of its long-cherished ambition. For this purpose an English Pope was chosen by the consistory at Rome, in order that an English king could be enlisted through him to undertake to do this work for the Roman Church. It was necessary to enlist one as little troubled with conscience as the Pope himself, who could raise the necessary force to make the murderous venture a success. So Pope Adrian IV, for this was the title he took when he had a new name given to him by Rome, urged Henry to invade Ireland. The king was to be rewarded with the plunder which he was to obtain from that rich and fertile country, besides the annual tax to be levied and the fees to be collected for the crown thereafter. Adventurer though Henry was, and perhaps eager for the expedition, he saw fit, before launching such a campaign of violence against a neighboring people who were at peace with his countrymen, to cover up under the permit of this usurping Pope his evil designs. The project was later approved by Pope Alexander III with consistent moral turpitude. It was stipulated in the agreement between Henry and the Pope that the king would cause to be collected the sum of 1 penny from each house on the island, to be forwarded to enrich the coffers of the Church and to recompense it for the moral and spiritual countenance it gave to the initial step of a crime which was to lead in time to almost complete destruction of the Irish race, under the English government's policy of to hell or to cannot with the Irish people. This policy almost decimated the Irish race, and also brought about a most determined effort on the part of the government and clergy to keep the English people systematically deceived and falsely instructed as to the real cause of the outrages and massacres committed in Ireland by the English forces. The English clergy dared not tell them that they were begun to cover up and hide the true source of Christianity, the Bible and the Savior Jesus and the papacy. The people were made to see only the obvious cause, the resistance of the Irish people to being dispossessed of their lands for the benefit of the English and later the Scotch settlers, to whom they had been given. The province of Connaught was rocky and had a poorer soil than the other provinces of the country, and what good land there was in the province was given to the English settlers and government adherents. Consequently, it could maintain only a small remnant of the people. Thousands of them died from hardships due to exposure to the inclemencies of the weather and to diseases caused by poor and insufficient food, while the Roman Pope and his staff of cardinals sang hosannas in grand display before the Roman people, and in secret behind their backs plotted murder and the degradation of a great nation. In order that some idea may be had of the ferocity and severity of the wars waged in Ireland due to the Roman-British plot and invasion, I shall quote from a writer who is before all an apologist for Rome and Britain. Encyclopedia Britannica, 9th edition, volume 13, pages 264 through 265, article Ireland. This writer says in regard to the constant warfare carried on there, especially of the War of Elizabeth under Ormond against the Geraldines in Munster, quote, "The horrors of this war it is impossible to exaggerate. The four masters say that the lowing of a cow or the voice of a ploughman could scarcely be heard from Cashel to the farthest point in Kerry." End quote. At this point in his narrative, he attempts to minimize the effect of his previous statement of rapine and horrors would cast a doubt over it by saying that, quote, "Ormond, who, with all his severity, was honorably distinguished by good faith," end quote, claimed to have killed 5,000 men in a few months. One does not have to be very keen to see his idea in clothing Ormond with such honor and truthfulness. It is to create an impression in the mind of the reader that after a war of a few months, an indefinite period, such a small number of killed would not bespeak very great horror or severity. I am not much impressed with his honor or the truthfulness of the man Ormond, or with the statement attributed to him as a commander, but if he personally slew that number of men, they must have been unarmed and defenseless, and such a deed in itself would destroy every vestige of the attribute of honor from his character and stamp him as a veritable ruffian. And it is safe to say that if he had not possessed ruffianly qualities, he would not be Elizabeth's choice for that mission of destruction, for she herself was dishonest, as this writer apologetically admits, by saving that she was surrounded by enemies and that many of her predecessors were as crooked as she and less upright in intention. In fact, when the truth is told, the British element which engaged in the conquest of Ireland was, with their successors for hundreds of years, as coarse, as low, and as brutal men as could be found. This writer before quoted shows, page 261, volume 13, Encyclopedia Britannica, that when fortune did not always favor them in Ireland during the reign of Henry V, half of the English colony fled to England and were found to be so vicious a lot that the people of England could not endure them and they had to be ordered out of the country. Many of them, by offers of high pay, were induced to enlist in Henry's army for service in France. He further admits the brutality of those wars by saying that the Irish wars had not been a good school of humanity. The fact is that the English policy from the beginning in Ireland was not a humane one. Of the Ormond cruelties before cited, the same witness who quotes Edmund Spenser says that, quote, "Famine slew far more than the sword." End quote. He further says that, quote, "The survivors were unable to walk, but crawled out of the woods and glens." End quote. It may well be surmised that when an army of cutthroats bent on annihilation falls upon a rural population, there could not be many who could find secure shelter in the woods or glens. Spencer says of those who came forth, quote, "They looked like anatomies of death. They did eat the dead carrion, and one soon after another, insomuch as the very carcasses they spared not to scrape out of the graves, and to a plot of watercresses or shamrocks they flocked as to a feast." End quote. The section of the country which was ravaged and laid bare might easily have had at that time a population of 200,000 souls. History records that Oliver Cromwell ravaged that same district 70 years later and left it so bare that he was reported as saying that if a crow ate while flying over it, he would have to bring his food with him. After the Cromwellian massacres, the population of the island was at a low ebb, said to have been 850,000 only. It is a safe estimate to say that in former times the population was from 8 to 10 millions, if not more, for it was a religious axiom with the people, "Be ye fruitful and multiply." One of the adjuncts considered necessary by the British hierarchy acting for Rome to make Henry's expedition a success and to build up a false history which would serve the interests of the Church and the English government for future generations was a publicity bureau. It was established to assist in carrying out the papal policy, not only of destroying the Irish Church and nation, but also to put into effect a well thought out plan. It was worthy of the original bishop, whom Machiavelli had in mind for his diplomatic model, to vilify them before all mankind and posterity. Rome had then, as she has today, in her ranks, men of all grades of conscience and versatility, some of whom she could always find fit to carry out her ends, however vile they might be. The old man of the mountain had his faithful adherents and his emissaries likewise. A priest, known in history as Geraldus Cambrensis, was duly appointed to do this dastardly work, and it is mainly due to the false and slanderous writings and fictitious alibis set up in his vaticinal history, and in his work entitled The Conquest of Ireland, that a documentary foundation of history composed of willful and vicious falsehoods was laid down, and British writers have ever since made use of it. Geraldus's fables are supported, as it was arranged that they should be, by another setup, who is called Jocelyn. Thus did this knavish priest furnish a false documentary history of Ireland, from which both material and ideas have since been taken to traduce her, and especially during this last century, where they industriously circulated abroad through British propaganda. That his slanders are discredited today is not the fault of his sponsors, but it shows the base vileness and dishonesty of the Roman and British propagandists. A British clerical writer in the Encyclopaedia Britannica, Art Ireland, frankly admits that, in spite of the enormities and filthinesses which Geraldus says defiled the Irish Church, nothing worse could be found than marriages within the prohibited degrees, and trifling irregularities about baptism. So it becomes very clear that the invasion of Ireland by Henry II was a plot instigated by the Roman Church. For if she had been established in Ireland before that event, her discipline alone would have been enough to correct any such trifling abuses, if any such existed. To correct such trifling abuses would not be a cause for a war involving an invasion of the country incited by a church whose mission is professedly peace on earth, goodwill toward men. It is one of the most glaring and barefaced falsehoods ever invented, and they expected too much when they supposed that a fiction which was believed in an ignorant age would also continue to be believed in an enlightened one. The Irish nation was made the victim of a foul conspiracy of the Roman Church and England. She has been most terribly crucified between two thieves, and it is time for the best element among the English people to correct this great wrong. By such falsehoods, British priests and writers have endeavored to cast discredit upon Ireland's history in order to minimize any interest which might otherwise be shown by students of research, and so that no investigation or research could be made which might lead to damaging discoveries. Besides, it was intended to dampen and discourage any interest which the Irish might arouse in foreign countries toward winning moral or material aid in realizing their national independence. It is mainly from British sources that people in general, even in so-called enlightened countries, have their very limited knowledge of the Irish people or of their history, and formed their impressions based on meager and distorted information. The British press is most devotedly engaged in the same effort in our own day, and according to published information, quite a few of the publishers of our own country have been subsidized to misrepresent things Irish, while the British government has allowed its trained forces to commit barbarities against unoffending citizens in Ireland. But the people of Irish race, wherever they have cast their lot, by their capacity and wonderful achievements in all lands, have demonstrated the falsity of those slanders. Giraldus admitted, as he himself tells and is published by his English translator and publisher, that where people of his day who knew the facts laughed and scoffed at the absurd things he wrote, people of future generations would not know the truth and would not be able to scoff. He said, quote, "People of today laugh at these things because they know the facts, but people of future generations will not know, and therefore they will accept them as true history." End quote. Thus we see the vileness of a degenerate Roman priesthood employed in inventing falsehoods in order to slander the Irish church and nation. Giraldus also tells us that King Henry did not carry out his part of the agreement with the Pope, whom, of course, he could regard only with the contempt and distrust, in that he did not see that Peter's pence was collected and forwarded to Rome, and that part of it which was collected was put into the king's coffers instead. Giraldus seemed to have bewailed this fact very much, as well as the fact that he failed to receive promotion to bishopric from Henry, although he had previously lauded the king to the skies in a composition in which he hailed him as another Alexander possessing the wisdom of Solomon and the very personification of honor and the embodiment of virtue and learning. He also showered praises upon Henry's son John, who succeeded his father as King of England, but as no recognition or reward came to him from this source, he afterwards related to another cleric that it seemed to be his fate to have to seek reward always from dull-witted princes who never appreciated all he had done to advance their interests with his pen, and that he had praised them beyond their merits. Quote, "But that he was never given to telling the truth and could not adhere to it." End quote. Out of his own mouth comes the refutation of his fictitious writings, that he was incapable of uttering the truth. Conquest of Ireland by Giraldus Cambrensis. Henry found his affairs at this time so pressing with his son John in open revolt against him that, no doubt, even if he desired to do so, carrying out his agreement with Rome was very much more difficult than promising to do so. This agreement between the Pope and Henry is, in itself, proof that this was Rome's first entry into Ireland as a church, and she entered it as a monster with fire and sword to destroy the one real, true church of the Most High God, as will become apparent. The people of Ireland were not accustomed to contributing to the support of a foreign church or pope. Their own was the first and supreme Pope Universal. The Roman Pope was but a usurper. It is not my purpose now to relate more fully the history of those times, as it would be irrelevant to the subject at hand, but just so much as will show that Roman England have had a great and fundamental reason for suppressing knowledge of the past concerning Ireland and the religious worship of its priests and people previous to the advent of Rome and the English invasion. The papacy wished to keep the world in ignorance also as to how it had gained its foothold in that country, and for this purpose Saint Patrick was invented, and in the story was made to connect with Rome back in the 5th century, a story which was pure fiction. The Roman Church's connection with Ireland was brought about through the medium of the English sword and in no other way. The writer, in discussing matters with a priest, happened to refer to Irish literature. He said, "The Irish have no literature." When asked why, he answered, "I cannot speak. My lips are sealed." We are satisfied that Irish Roman Catholic priests have always been aware of this fraud. Church historians have let it be known that Rome merely disciplined the Irish Church in order to make it conform to the proper observance of Easter. But even Bishop Ussher, on the investigation, refused to believe it and was of the opinion that she had far weightier reasons. The Roman Church has thought herself secure from discovery and exposure from the fact that there was no written record allowed to come down to us, which described in detailed particulars the history of that crime. But the evidence stands strong against her. She has preserved enough of the stolen goods, so easily recognized as such, to convict her. It did not suffice to destroy most priceless treasures of Irish literature, which accumulated through centuries of learning and culture and which she found in Ireland, but she dealt a death blow to Irish liberty and freedom. That she destroyed so much literature in Ireland is not to be wondered at. Even if she did not destroy it at all, that which she preserved she has perverted and reconstructed, and some of it she has concealed by accrediting it to others. Her purpose was to hide the fact that works and knowledge were taken from Ireland and were the product of Irish genius and scholarship. To spread darkness and ignorance has been her mission from the beginning. In the year 400 A.D., the Church destroyed the great library of Alexandria in Egypt. She did the same in every center where any great library was known to exist. On the site of the destroyed temple in Alexandria, where the library had been kept, she built a church in honor of the noble army of martyrs, whom she herself had put to death. She killed them to get them out of her way. They then claimed them as martyrs to her faith. Gibbon's Rome, quoted in Bible Myths by T.W. Doane. By such methods and by interpolations and false writings by her priests from Eusebius down, she thought to keep facts secret from those upon whom she imposed her idolatry. Little did she suspect that after the employment of all the cunning known to her priests, who were versed in trickery backed up by the power first of the Roman state and later by that of England, that despite all this there would be exposed the villainous part she played in forging and placing the chains of slavery upon a great and brave people, whose true and actual history is great and unrivaled, a people to whom the different nations of the world of today are unaware of their great debt. That the great nations of the world today are unaware of their great debt to Ireland is to be inferred from the complacency with which they have viewed her oppression, with scarcely a protest against the foreign usurper. It is all the more to be regretted on the part of our own country, as a firm stand by our representatives at the Paris Peace Conference would have secured for her our oft-proclaimed object in entering the war, to secure the right of self-determination for small nations. We have failed in our duty to do the right, and empty professions are useless. It is good works that count. The nation that gave us a knowledge of God, of heaven, of the Savior, and of spiritual ideals and truth, the Bible and verities of a future life, that nation is suffering from civil strife, her territory dismembered, deprived of her national standing among the family of nations, all through the effects of a foul conspiracy on the part of Rome and England. Chapter 5. The Bible and Irish Book altered and adapted by British Roman transcribers. Although our Christian peoples in the mere advanced countries of today have denounced Jewish pogroms and deliberately planned murders of Jewish people in some of the countries of Eastern Europe during the World War, what can they think of the wholesale deportations and murders and suffering inflicted upon the people of what is now called Syria, when they knew that the Roman Church put her plan in operation to charge them with having crucified the ideal Savior Jesus, the Sun God, and scattered them broadcast over the world? By dispersing these people, she cleared the way for the renaming of places in Judea to make it appear that such a man as Jesus had lived there, that these various places, said to have been the scenes of his life and travels, were actually real places, and in existence on the map with these names. It is something awful to contemplate, but the Roman Church did this thing, and the people whom she punished thus, and who bear the undeserved stigma to this day for crucifying the Savior, are as innocent of such a deed as the child unborn. The Roman fathers employed most ingenious methods to establish the authenticity of Jesus. To that end, they had stories written up purporting to be by certain men, some of whom denied his godlike powers, while there were other witnesses who declared that he worked wonders. Her scribes also wrote up accounts of those who were supposed to be his companions, but written in such a way that their stories would not agree in every minute detail, but near enough so that it would not appear that one account was a copy of the other. It must be as a witness giving a different and distinctly individual narration of the facts as seen by himself. These trained fabricators considered that no two or more persons would write the facts regarding an event in real life in just the same identical words. So it was thought best to have a little variation inserted in the accounts, as given by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So that is how we find it arranged in those 4 books by the Roman doctors. If Luke tells of an event in one way, John tells it a little differently, and so with Matthew and Mark. Luke records that the miraculous draught of fishes was made at the beginning of the ministry of Jesus. John says that it did not happen until after he had risen from the dead. John says that, although the number of fish was great, the net was not broken, and Luke says that their net did break. Matthew says that Jesus told the 12 apostles to go and preach, and commanded them to provide neither gold nor silver, nor brass in your purses, nor scrip for your journey, neither 2 coats, neither shoes, nor yet staves. Mark is made to mention the same incident, just a little bit different and with a slight contradiction of his infallible brother scribe. He says that Jesus commanded them to take nothing for their journey save a staff only. Like inconsistencies, which are so many in these 4 Gospels, stamp them as counterfeit books. In fact, the very names of the authors to whom these books are ascribed are forgeries and misleading. They were intended so to be, for it was claimed that they were Hebrew, while the plain truth is that they were taken entire from the ideals of the Irish Gospels, with the nomenclature slightly changed in order to escape detection. It is not my purpose to give an extensive elucidation or explanation of the Bible in this chapter or work, but as the Irish Bible and Irish Great Pyramid of 𝗂𝗍 were closely related in spiritual and symbolic significance as agencies and landmarks for the guidance of wayfaring mankind in its progress upward towards spiritual enlightenment and regeneration, for this reason I feel I must touch upon this phase in my theme specifically, if only briefly. As I have shown by citations that forgeries were committed, I shall prove by explanations that our Bible is an Irish book of pre-Roman times, and an out-and-out theft without acknowledgement from the Irish Church of 𝗂𝗍. Any competent person who knows the Irish language cannot fail to recognize it. Our present version of the Bible, then, is an authorized adaptation from the original Irish scriptures, with alterations and additions made from time to time by Roman and British churchmen in secrecy, as they deemed it necessary and advisable to do so. The following agreement in the writings under the names of Matthew, Mark, and Luke regarding the impression made upon the people by the teachings of Jesus is an example which shows plainly the work of the forging priests. It would be impossible for such agreement to have occurred in the original writings of any three men writing individually and independently on any subject whatsoever, but in fabrication from the older works and collaborating, the priest scribes simply blundered and made each of the three witnesses write down and repeat the same identical expression in copy as to how Jesus impressed the people. Matthew says, "They were astonished at his doctrine." Mark says, "They were astonished at his doctrine." Luke says, "They were astonished at his doctrine." Many authors and critics have commented upon and pointed out the inaccuracies and inconsistencies of the scriptures, and many of them have stated their firm belief that they were copied from older books, but none of them could obtain a clue beyond a surmise, which was far from the truth, and none of them was able to produce the real facts which were necessary to convince. But the work that they did has helped and made it possible to accomplish the desired end. They found so many flaws in it which the jugglers did not cover up, that it kept the question open until the solution was found. The true source has escaped discovery until now. At least it has never before been disclosed to the knowledge of mankind as a whole. The Irish scriptures were altered and adapted to the scheme of the church in order to make the fable of 𝗖𝗵𝗽 an historical and geographical fact. Names from the scriptures were given to places in Syria during its occupation by the Crusaders to bear this out. It also suited the purpose of British statecraft to obscure and suppress all evidence of the greatness and culture of the Irish nation, than whom no people in the world's history have reached greater heights, both spiritually and intellectually, nor have suffered greater injustice at the hands of priestly impostors or political oppressors. The men who were engaged in executing this literary fraud committed as well the audacious crime of completely effacing all evidence of credit due the Irish nation for the most brilliant and glorious service to civilization and human enlightenment. It almost passes belief that a fraud so stupendous could escape so long without discovery. But when we consider the thoroughness and extent to which the plot was carried out, and the magnitude of the forces which were employed in the work, it is not so much to be wondered at, forces such as the Roman Empire with its world power, than the Roman Catholic Church and the British Kingdom, with propaganda systematically spread abroad in order to create a false impression of everything pertaining to the past history of Ireland and her people. These are the forces which have perpetrated and profited by this great fraud. The deception is still continued, and the secret jealously guarded by both the Roman Church and Britain from the world at large, but more particularly from the Irish people who have suffered so much from those two adverse forces. The men who executed this plot were acting jointly in the interest of both Rome and Britain. Even to this day, the British government does not encourage, even if it will allow, excavations or investigations to be made about the Hill of Tara in Ireland. Reverend Joseph Wilde in When the World Comes to an End. I will give 2 citations here, with more to follow, to show that the names of many of the characters in the Bible are plainly Irish, and it is because of this fact that the Irish Roman Catholic priests would not allow the Irish Catholics to read the Bible. They were told not to read it, that it was not a sufficient rule of faith. The real reason was that some of the Irish people might recognize the Irish names in a quote-unquote Jewish Bible and ask questions that it would embarrass them to answer satisfactorily. Nevertheless, it is a very astonishing thing that what now appears so clearly fraudulent could have escaped detection for so long a time. There are 3 main reasons for this. First, that the people are slow to attribute fraud and dishonesty to the clergy. Second, that the Irish Catholics who could speak the Irish language believed, as they were told by the priests, the Bible was brought to them from outside instead of being of Irish origin, and, being uninstructed in the principles of man's nature, were not given to investigation or research for spiritual truth. And third, that the field of religious literature has been dominated by the works of professional preachers and other religionists who would have kept up the delusion knowingly, or who took it for granted that the published accounts of the origin of the scriptures were, in the main, true and were originally written in Greek with one single copy in Hebrew, as has always been asserted. It will therefore be a surprise to Bible readers of today who have had no suspicion of this deception to be told that it was through the medium of the Irish language that the true key would be found for the solution of the mystery, the origin of the Bible. The proof of this fact is here given for all mankind to see and know. The first of the two citations to be given in this chapter is from the book of John, chapter 3, 23rd verse. Quote, "And John was baptizing in Aenon near to Salem, because there was much water there, and they came and were baptized." End quote. In the latest revision of the Bible, the doctors have altered the word Aenon and have made it Enon. In the older version, it is Aenon. This is a compound of two Irish words. Aeon, meaning a circle of the sun, a year, and On, also a name of the sun. The complete word itself means the sun. The word on also signifies cause, reason, swiftness, fierceness, eagerness, excellent, noble, good, also wolf dog. These are qualities and attributes associated with and applied to the solar sun, and to the sun god by the Aryan or Irish priests of 𝗖𝗵𝗽𝗀. Their theology was based on the idea that the supreme deity never had nor has a name. He is known only by attributes, as the good, or God, holy, most high, etc. And as the solar sun is the center of light and is great representative, or sun, S-O-N, in our system, the sun god is named after the qualities and attributes of some idea, such as the horseman, or charioteer, the strong one, or Samson, or the fierce one, Horus, the heavenly wolf who is eager, swift, and fierce. The Irish, during their sojourn in Egypt, gave the name of On to one of their cities on the Nile. The city of On, the city of the sun, was afterwards called Heliopolis by the Greeks and Romans. Salem is a quote-unquote Hebrew word, but the basis of it is in the Irish word solas, light. As Hebrew is a jargon of the Irish, it follows more or less closely the root it is taken from, as will be seen. So, Salem means the city of God or light. The meaning of this myth is that John, Aen, the sun, was baptizing in Aenon, the city of the sun, near to Salem, the city of God, in the realm of light, the celestial kingdom. Where else could such a being as the pure and perfected man be said to dwell? In this myth, John, Aen, spelled A-E-N, E-I-O-N, and A-I-N, three forms of the word and all pronounced Ain, represents the redeemed and glorified man at the highest stage of spiritual attainment, next to the messianic state, so that in his succeeding life or incarnation here again on earth, he will be the Messiah. In the Irish mythic narrative of the Bible, we see that after John, the prophet and holy man, comes the perfected man-God, the Messiah, 𝗖𝗵𝗽𝗀, Jesus. This is an example of the esoteric truth and wisdom which lies hidden beneath the veil of the scriptural allegory as formulated by those inspired Irish adepts, and though they have been denied the credit of authorship through a thieves' compact of silence, their wisdom and their works still exist in both the Bible and Great Pyramid of 𝗖𝗵𝗽. The second citation to prove that the Bible is Irish, purely and unmistakably so, and I defy contradiction, is taken from the books of Mark and Samuel. The Pharisees questioned Jesus because the disciples plucked ears of corn on the Sabbath. He said, quote, "Have ye never read what David did when he had need, how he went into the house of God in the days of Abiathar the high priest, and did eat the shrew bread, which is not lawful to eat but for the priests?" End quote. Mark 2, 24, 25, and 26. The first book of Samuel contains this version of David and the shrew bread. Quote, "Then came David to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest. So the priest gave him hallowed bread, for there was no other bread there but the shrew bread that was taken from before the Lord." End quote. Chapter 21, 1-6. The foregoing is but a cryptic allusion to the perfecting work of the initiate who is engaged in the effort of eradicating from his nature all worldly ambitions and the desires of the flesh for the development of his higher self, the solar body, the God within himself. The word Abiathar, the name of the high priest, is such a plain and easily recognized Irish word that even the uneducated Irishman or Scotsman who is able to speak Gaelic can understand it, and will recognize it at once as a word of Irish or Gaelic speech. It is a compound of two words. The word ab means lord or father, and atar is also the word for father. The two words combined would literally be father, father. The literal sense of it would be head father, for the word ab is applied to the head of a monastery. But the esoteric sense of it is high father or God. The vowel letter I is introduced to connect the two words into one. The Roman British scribe in this instance gives us a compound Irish word, and of course, without the least suggestion that such is the case, makes a play on the name and presents it to us in the English version of the Bible as the name of the Hebrew high priest. It is a priestly deception, as will be seen readily on the part of the transcriber of Mark, when we understand that the character David and the incident connected with him is but a story invented for the purpose of containing an idea, as follows. Abiathar in this allegory alludes to the high Father God manifesting spiritually through the solar sun in his human counterpart, which is the solar or luminous spiritual body of the initiate David, who is on the upward path, striving for the victory of the spirit over matter in the material body or flesh. This should be instructive to every wayfaring man who is traveling eastward towards the dawn, from darkness to light, into whose hands these pages may come, as well as to the general body of Bible readers. The copyist and transcriber who has given us the version ascribed to Samuel has David go to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest. The word Nob is Irish and is spelled Noeb, but it is pronounced as if it were naive, with the O having a short sound as OE. If the word was written by the priests without the intent to deceive, they would have presented to us in this form, NOB, the dot over the B making it V or BH, which in the Irish has the sound of V. They've taken advantage of the alphabetical features of the Irish language to perpetuate a fraud on the people of the world. The word Nob means heaven, sacred or holy. The word Ahimelech means the heavenly king or solar sun, who is figuratively a champion, hero, or ruler. Melchizedek is another form of the word from the same root. The letter A is pronounced broad, as if it were AW. The letter H is added to it for an aspirate to soften it. Together they form a prefix. Melech is the Hebraized or jargonized form of the Irish word meol, an animal or ideal for the sun. As the sun moves swiftly, it is in imagination meol, an animal. It is the figurative name given to the sun by the Irish priests of Iessa. Therefore the sun is called Meolcu, pronounced Melku, a greyhound. It is also called Onku, a wolf. Hence the terms applied to the sun, the swift one, the fierce one. The greyhound and the wolfhound have ever been favorites with the Irish and figure in their legends and fables. We see the same deception practiced by the Irish Roman priesthood upon the Irish Catholics of our own day in the word 𝗵𝗍𝗀, a name of the personified sun. He is the fictitious person to whom, in the story, St. Patrick was sold as a slave, thus proving to us again that the lying and dishonest priests of Rome wrote a false and worthless history for the Irish people. They are the people who stole the ancient Irish Bible and palmed it off on the world as a Jewish book produced by a people over in Syria. It is an invention and an imposture on the world. The Irish word for wolf dog is on, hence the Irish priests of 𝗖𝗵𝗽𝗀 during the sojourn of the Irish race in Egypt gave the name to a city on the Nile. They also applied the name Onku, the wolf, to the sun. Therefore we have the heavenly wolf Osiris, meaning the high eastern sun, from os, high, and soir, pronounced seer, and meaning east, hence the morning sun. He is Horus, the risen, from the Irish word or, aspirated to hor, meaning a lord or savior, one to whom prayer is offered. The word also means from whom in the sense of descent. Hence we find the Horus is the son of Osiris. In the mythical idea, the sun is Osiris in the early morning, and he becomes Horus, the risen sun and savior, in the early forenoon. He is the wolf Horus at noon when his rays are hot and oppressive, also Typhon, the evil one. He is the Lord and Savior given to the Egyptian people to worship by the Irish priests of 𝗖𝗍𝗽. Here are the facts that defy contradiction. The Irish language is the treasure house in which these indisputable proofs exist for everyone who wishes to view them. With the truths disclosed in these pages, mankind is confronted with a new and altered viewpoint which gives us a new conception of history. The priest and churchman has imposed upon the credulity of the professor. A new perspective opens before us, and scholars and honest-minded men and women must address themselves to the task of straightening out the confused and unreliable accounts of the past, which have emanated from such obviously self-interested sources as Rome and Britain. 𝗵𝗵𝗽𝗁, then, like Abiathar, is God in his aspect of the solar king or sun, whose divine human aspect is the perfected man. Therefore, in this myth, we are told that David ate the shewbread, that is, he received the sacred wisdom of the priests, practiced abstemiousness and self-denial, and came into a state of holiness from which he advances to the perfect or messianic state. And so from the advancing David, the Messiah is born. Hence Jesus is said to be born of the house of David. Thus it is to the Irish Magian adepts of the ancient religion of 𝗖𝗍𝗽 that we are indebted for the knowledge of these esoteric spiritual truths, preserved under the veil of allegory and myth. The distinction and renown which the Magi gave to Ireland, which island in mythology is referred to as Isle of the Blessed, has been taken to herself by Rome, as if it had come about since her ministration there. Hence the allusion made by her priests to Ireland as the island of saints, that is, Roman saints. Those great men developed the powers of the soul and became godlike, while their Roman successors have become renowned for their capacity for acquiring stocks and bonds and become distinguished according to their ability as investors. They have denied to the ancient Irish masters of wisdom all acknowledgement of their indebtedness, and blotted out so far as they could the very memory of their existence, ascribing their erudition and wisdom to others, and they mention them only to traduce them. They covertly refer to them as the snakes, which St. Patrick banished from the island, while the multitude is taught to believe that it was the creeping reptiles of the dust that he banished. The latter never did exist in Ireland. See The Esoteric Club by Reverend Canon Lynch of Cork, Ireland. They do not apply to them the dignified term of serpent, which is the symbol of wisdom, but snakes to imply what is low and evil. Baseness could go no further. The Irish race has suffered humiliation even to this day through this willful traduction and carefully directed perversion of their history. Fables have been invented and taught to the people as genuine facts and bona fide history. The writer has, like others, absorbed a lot of their fiction and must confess it was some task to unlearn it and to adjust his mind to the reception of even obvious truths which conflicted with pious untruths. It is certainly a preposterous thing to allow a body of pretentious impostors to instill their falsehood into the minds of the growing youth. Moreover, this political priesthood insults our intelligence by considering themselves solely as God's anointed and his special favorites. We are told that in England and Ireland it was the practice to give the priests in many places a number of shares of distillery stock as provision for their future. The priests speak of their churches as plants, just as if they were factories and they are fitted up with slot receptacles to catch any fractional currency which might either by advice or suggestion be enticed from the pockets of the worshippers. It is safe to say that light is advancing and that truth is progressing regardless of this reactionary force, which is now exposed for the first time in a manner which reveals their plot. It cannot help but open the eyes of mankind to the great fraud, and more especially awaken the Irish people who have been so foully betrayed and sold into the hands of their oppressors. In the citations which I have given to show and prove that the Bible is an Irish book, the names of places and the names of characters given show plainly the direct connection with and their derivation from the Irish. The elucidation of the Great Pyramid and of the topic Egypt will add to this proof, so that anyone who comes with open mind and unbiased judgment will not fail to see it. Every lover of truth qualified to judge will be convinced that the names are Irish and only slightly changed in the form and spelling, changed only enough to deceive the unsuspecting. It is seldom that a man arises outside the ranks of the clergy who develops a knowledge of the elements upon which the religious myth is constructed. To solve the mystery of the origin of the Bible, this knowledge and that of the Irish language, combined with a true perspective of history, was necessary. It required also a true insight into Ireland's past and the villainous intrigues of the Roman and British priesthoods, and the role they played in shaping events of momentous consequence in world affairs. To conceal those facts from posterity, they had recourse to the scheme of falsifying the world's history and substituting, therefore, a tissue of lies and inventions. The British propaganda has been fostered by the Government Board of Education and such misleading works as Pennock's Catechism of the History of Ireland, which were put into the Irish school system. Persecution and propaganda have served the purpose intended and have caused the Catholic Irish to place an almost blind belief in the integrity of their priests, who are a part of the Roman Church and ably doing the work of Rome in carrying on this deception, while the English churchman has done his part to the same end, namely, to keep knowledge of Ireland's great past history under cover of oblivion. The Irish Catholics were directed away from a study of the Bible instead of towards it, and made to depend on what the priests saw fit to dole out to them. Otherwise, it is reasonable to suppose that long before this day some Irish-speaking person could not have failed to detect the idiomatic Irish in the very warp and woof of the Old Testament. It is an undeniable fact that the Irish-speaking Roman Catholics were not frequent readers, much less students of the Bible. I have laid some stress on this phase of my theme, but not inordinately so, considering that I am announcing the greatest discovery in the history of all literature, that the Bible is Irish and of Irish origin. I am aware that this will be a shock and surprise to students and intellectuals in all the enlightened countries of the world, to be shown that they've been made the victims of a fraud. It was bound to be discovered in time, for truth so evident could not be hidden forever from the minds that were free from bias. Anyone qualified to approach the truth could not fail to see it, even though the schemers were reiterating their claims through the press and from all the pulpits of Christendom. There is no doubt in the writer's mind but that the inner circles in British statecraft and high church, as well as those of the Roman Church in Britain and Ireland, are keenly aware of this truth and carefully guard the secret of their fraud. A few years ago the writer read a history of Ireland by Thomas Moore, the famous poet and author, in which he bewailed the fact that at every turn in his quest for knowledge and facts he found a conspiracy of silence and suppression. He produced his work under just such discouraging conditions, but he rendered a service to posterity by publishing his observations of the attitude of those persons who were in a position to assist him in his search for facts, had they wished to do so. My studies and investigations have enabled me to discover facts and truths as presented here, and these truths will stand every investigation. It all goes to prove that even the cleverest forgers and falsifiers are not safe from exposure and discovery. So it is the case with the Roman and British forgers. Although the imposition of the Savior Jesus and the substitution of him for 𝗖𝗍 brought great riches to the Roman Church, it required a great and tremendous effort to succeed in making it appear to the world that he had an actual historical existence. The people were in a terrible state of ignorance and superstition, a condition which was favorable to the Church in effecting this cherished idea. Her ambition to make that one project alone successful was the cause of inflicting untold misery and suffering upon the people of 3 continents during the wars of the Crusades, which were instituted for that end. The Roman Church was obliged to enlist practically all Europe in these wars. It is estimated that there were 2 million lives lost in carrying out that scheme in the struggle to drive the Mohammedans out of Syria in the 10th and 11th centuries. It was during the occupancy of the so-called Holy Land by the Crusaders for a period of 87 years that Rome gave the names to the localities and places there, which are mentioned in the scriptures, and which names had not been before identified with such places. During that time, they did everything that they thought necessary or that circumstances would permit in preparing the ground to place marks of identification about each locality, which was selected to be the birthplace or scene of activity of each of the mythical characters to whose fictitious existence special significance or prominence was to be given. Such, for instance, is the example of the patriarchal character Abraham, whom they assigned to the land of Ur in Chaldea. Ur is an idiomatic Irish word and means the sun, fire, and the east. The word also expresses an Irish idea or conception of heaven. Ur is connected with the fabulous Irish land Tir na Nog, the land of the young, or the land of perpetual youth. The meaning of Ur in this instance is fresh, green, plenty, new, not stale or old. Liberal, the land of plenteousness, the heavenly kingdom. And Abraham himself is most obviously an Irish idea of the personified sun. There can be no room for doubt as to this fact, as he comes from Ur, the sun. And to be true to Irish mythic form, each syllable of his name is a name of the sun. The word Ab is an Irish name for father, and here signifies father or creator sun. And Ra means the moving or revolving sun. And Am means time, for the sun is the governor and lord of time and regulator of the seasons. And furthermore, as Abraham is the sun, he comes from Ur in Chaldea. Chaldea, a mythical and fictitious name falsely said to be of a country in Asia. The name is from the Irish word caul, C-A-U-L, a veil, secret, hidden, meaning mystically the great unseen. 𝗂𝐻𝗆 was an Irish religious ascetic of the worship of 𝗖𝗍, a seer. Abraham has 2 female consorts, one of whom he marries. She is Sarah, from the Irish word sor or sork, sark, meaning delight, light, pleasure, bright, conspicuous, clear, the day. The other woman was named Hagar, from the root word akor, meaning covetousness, desire. She represents the night. The letter H is only an auxiliary in the Irish alphabet and is used as an aspirate, but the doctors have used it as a regular letter for deceptive reasons in the formation of the name of this mythic character, and instead of using the letter C, they use the G. These 2 letters in the old manuscripts were often used one for the other indiscriminately. And so we have Hagar, and as she is desire, she is not Abraham's true wife, but his concubine. She bears him a son, Ishmael, the Irish 𝗖𝗵𝗵𝗀𝗀, the son, and 𝗵𝗀 means bald. The young sun, or early morning sun, is said to be bald, as he has no rays until later. So Ishmael is the young or morning sun born of the night. So, in the Irish Bible myth, we find that Abraham the sun has two wives, Sarah the fair one, the day, and Hagar the dark one, the night. Sarah is jealous of Hagar the concubine, and has Abraham send her away. In the phenomena of nature, the day always sends the night away. Chapter 6. The Irish Pope Kings, formerly the rulers of Britain. A writer in the Encyclopaedia Britannica, in the article on Ireland, gives a very adroit presentation of when and how the Scots-Irish were converted to Christianity. He seems to be conscious of the deception that has been perpetrated on the world, and that the history of this event could be presented to us in an improved and more plausible fashion than it has ever been done. This deficiency he has endeavored to make up by cunningly mixing into his narrative in a neat dress a composition of some truth with fable and fiction, and all in such a manner as to make his story to the uninitiated appear like a very fair and truthful account. But now that the truth is out, his story falls flat, although cleverly gotten up and evidently intended to be a very satisfactory summary of Ireland's past. As the Britannica is supposed to have weight, it appears to be a good medium for circulating such misleading information. It is quite obvious that the object is not to tell truth, but to connect up all the missing links of the story, which his predecessors might have been a little slack about making it look right. It would really be amusing if it were not so unjust to see how he tries to mix up things by trying to confuse the reader as to the identity of the Scots, the Picts, and the Southern Irish of Munster. The truth is that they are all of one race and people, and these names have been given to them separately as a part of the scheme to confuse. The nearer to the seat of the great crime, the greater the need to confuse any would-be investigators. This writer says, quote, "At that time, 314 AD, the Irish had possession of many places in West and South Britain and must have come in contact with Christians. These were more numerous and the church better organized in South Wales and Southwest Britain, where the Munster or Southern Irish were, than in North Wales, which was held by the Scots proper." End quote. Encyclopaedia Britannica, 9th edition, page 247. This is an example of how he tries to confuse his readers by making it appear that there was easy intercourse between the Irish and Roman followers. There was no such intercourse. The adherents of each church were practically identical with their armies. The Roman Church was only where the Roman spearhead was and nowhere else in Britain. Nor did the Romans lay claim exclusively to the title of Christians until, as is said, after 325 AD, after the Council of Nice. And there was no moving about of the inhabitants from the Roman to the Irish lines. They were kept as much apart as the peoples of the French and German territories during the late World War. There was no difference in race between the people of Munster, whom he calls Irish, and the same people whom he calls the Scots proper in North Wales. And there was no difference between those two peoples and the Picts. They were all the same people, and EIRE or Aran, called Scotia by the priests, was the motherland of the race. The name of Scotia or Scotland has been transferred to Alba as part of the deception. As there has been a great crime committed and a monstrous imposture put over on the people of the world, they found it to be extremely necessary to write an account of those people that would be confusing, and to change even the local names of places. So those British priests have written up a lot of mythical accounts of tribes and characters with which to do this. It is very easy to see through when it is explained. but it requires study with the necessary knowledge at first to understand it. The accounts of the early beginnings, as given in the histories of Ireland, Scotland, and England, like the early histories of other countries, were all written and composed by the clergy and for purposes of deception and for the very reasons set forth in these pages. They have done this work under assumed names in order to conceal the fact, and what they have written is a concoction of fiction and fable mostly, that is, so far as real, actual, matter-of-fact happenings are concerned. The priests who conceived the plan to deceive us by giving the name of Picts to a tribe of people took as a basis for their idea a class or order among the ancient Irish priesthood of Iessa, who were ascetics. They have called them a tribe and have given them the name of Picts, just as if we today should call the Odd Fellows or bishops a different race from the rest of the American people. The word Pict means a musician and is a camouflaged word for a druid priest or magician, one who understands sacred magic or the occult spiritual forces locked up within the human body. The body is called the lyre of Apollo, and he who understands that instrument is therefore a Pict or musician, because of certain nerve centers or ganglia through which the spiritual force energizes. This is why the harp is an insignia of the ancient Irish and secretly alludes to Ireland's distinction and preeminence as the homeland of the Magian priesthood. No other country or people has such a symbol, and for a good and sufficient reason. The Irish, previous to the English invasion and the sack of their church, were called Scots, we are told, not Irish or Picts by the Romans. The island had many names attesting to its spiritual character, but Ireland was not one of them. This name is a living testimony to British perfidy and cupidity, for they conferred this name upon it. That Ireland was preeminently the sacred isle of spiritual sun worship, and not the sacred isle of Romanism as the Roman priests would have us believe, can be seen even by the very names of its provinces. It is figuratively likened to a living being. Ulster is the head or top of the island, and Munster is the lowest point or foot. Leinster is the day or dawn side, and 𝗂𝗵𝗵𝗽𝗁 or Connacht is the side on which the sun departs, or the night side of the sun, while 𝗵𝗵 represents the middle or midriff of the island or body. This writer surely does try to make out that because there were Roman Christians in Britain in the beginning of the 4th century, there were Roman Christians in Ireland. He cites the fact that there were British bishops at the Council of Arles in 314 AD. If so, they most likely came from the British territory that had been conquered by the Roman arms and held for the Roman Church, so it is not surprising that they were there, for there were Romanists. None other would have been allowed to live in that territory. They must become Romanists or die. The Irish Church, which was the original Christian church, was in a struggle for its very life with Rome, and it never surrendered or compromised. Hence the war to the finish, and false statements, no matter how cunningly invented, cannot alter this fact. Rome has the stolen goods in her possession, and she has falsified to the world as to where and how she obtained possession of them. They have set up and quote from many false authorities, but to no purpose. The same writer says that the Irish held many places in West and South Britain about this time, and only legends would show an Irish occupation of a much earlier time. Encyclopedia Britannica, 9th edition, page 246. And that they must have met many Christians there. Yes, they did come in contact with the Romanists at the sword's point, but not in the manner in which he would have us believe. I may ask, what were the Irish doing in England at this time in the South and West? They were there at the time just as they had been there from long ages before, and the Celtic race occupied those islands. They were ruled by the Irish Pope kings who held the sovereignty of all those islands. They were in the south and west of Britain at this time because they were already the occupants of the country and were attacked there by the forces of the invading Roman armies who had won the central parts of the country. This writer surmises and builds up false premises on which to put forth further misrepresentations, and he calls upon the writings of other clerics to bear him out, such as Germanus, Lupus, Palladius, Patrick, and Colgan, also the Book of Armagh, and Probus, etc. Just so much worthless material so far as bona fide authority or truth is concerned. People are not so credulous today. Times have changed since the day when a bishop could stand up and tell the people that he had just received a letter from Christ telling them that they must do certain things and not do other things, as did Eustace, abbot of Flay, quoted in Richard A. Proctor's The Great Pyramid, who told his flock that he had found a letter from Christ that morning on the altar, forbidding them to engage in activities on Sunday. Clerical writers or the bishops think that they can still put one over. It is said that among the Balkan peoples, the Vlach native of Wallachia is the sharpest in a trade or barter of any of the peoples there. He is so clever that the others say that he was born 3 days before the devil. But it can safely be said that the quote-unquote bishop was born 3 days before the Vlach. To illustrate, Wallachia is a rocky and mountainous country where nature has been parsimonious of her gifts to man. Therefore, it is only by great industry and effort that the people are able to eke out a living from those stony hills. But the priest thrives there. He sees to that. There's a superstition prevailing that it is an ill omen to hear a hen cackle at night. The best way to avoid evil effects from this is to bring the fowl to the nearest monastery as a gift. An Irish proverb runs, "If there is a hen or goose, it's on the priest's table it will be." Webster's dictionary has it that to deacon is to cheat, and observation has justified the application of the term. To bishop surely means to lie, judging from all the fiction that has been given out under that head. The bishop is not chosen for his piety or spiritual qualities, but because of his administrative ability, shrewdness, and business qualifications. The more this writer in the Encyclopedia Britannica tries to explain things, the more he unwittingly proves that our facts are as stated, that Rome came to Ireland centuries later than is claimed, and then only to usurp, absorb, and destroy. In explaining the status in the Irish Church of the 𝗂𝗵𝗵𝗀, or the co-heir of the bishop as inheritor of both the spiritual and temporal rights, privileges of the spiritual tribe or family, who might be a layman and possibly have sole power, fall to himself. He says, quote, "This singular association of lay and spiritual powers was liable to the abuse of having the whole succession fall into lay hands, as happened to a large extent in later times. This led to many misconceptions of the true character and discipline of the Irish medieval church." Page 248. Aside from the question of whether the office of bishop should be filled by a clerical or a layman, if Rome established her church rule in Ireland about the beginning of the 5th century, as she claims she did, and converted the whole island through the mission of St. Patrick, and, quote, "peaceably and without the shedding of a drop of blood," end quote, it is very strange that the Irish people, who were so easily converted and who so readily adopted the Roman religion and priests, and who, if this were so, were immediately under the discipline of the Roman Church, should prove so recalcitrant later and have maintained this insubordination all through medieval times when Rome is supposed to have full sway there, having, according to supposition, established her church rule there from 500 to 600 years previously. This story, we maintain, is composed of fiction without a grain of truth. In Rome's history, in dealing with opposition either of a people or of an insubordinate branch of the priesthood, has she been shown to pursue a vacillating or tolerant policy? Quite the contrary. She did not show much toleration in her treatment of the Huguenots. The massacre of St. Bartholomew will attest to that. She was a demon of cruelty wherever she had power. Did she coddle the Albigenses in the south of France when they refused to subscribe to her beliefs? The papal envoy, the abbot Arnold, gave instructions to the general of the papal army when the latter said he could not distinguish the heretics from the faithful. "Slay them all. God will know his own." And in the course of a few years, there were slaughtered 180,000 souls. So history itself refutes the claim that Rome was dominant or even present in Ireland, and substantiates the claim that the Irish Church had its own rule during medieval times, previous to the English conquest. They have invented the pretext "to discipline" as an explanation for King Henry's invasion, but it is merely a cloak under which to conceal the purpose and act of conquest of the Irish Church. The pontiff of the Irish at this time, 1172 AD, was Gelasius. Roman writers claim him as their own under the designation of primate and refer to him as the saintly Gelasius. His name bespeaks his office as the representative of the sun, from Gal, bright, the sun. The name is a true and perfect idiom and ideal of the Irish church sun worship of 𝗖𝗔. It does not connect up at all with Rome. In the light of the knowledge which we have today, the deception is most transparent. This conquest and its results were the most important events in the history of the Roman Church, and they've been fraught with consequence to mankind. They represent truly the triumph of might over right. The writer in the Encyclopedia Britannica tries to make fact and fiction correspond, but without success. The writers of the Church have had no scruples in the matter of altering facts to accomplish their purpose, and did not hesitate to use deception. Wolsey visualized the future when he was Bishop of London, in addressing a convention of the clergy on the subject of the printing press, which was new at the time, 1474 AD, when he said, quote, "If we do not destroy this dangerous invention, it will one day destroy us." End quote. Bible Myths, page 438, by T.W. Doane. It is in spite of the clergy that light and knowledge have spread. This writer, already alluded to, says that the differences which existed in the Irish Church as compared to the Roman Church were due to Ireland's isolation. Encyclopedia Britannica, 9th edition, page 250. But Ireland was not isolated in those days. It is only since she came under English rule that she became isolated. Before that time, up to and for long after the Punic Wars, she was the greatest commercial nation in the world, for she was the homeland of the so-called Phoenicians, Irish. Their trading ships sailed on every sea, and it is logical to assume, as a natural consequence, that the traders and merchants of other countries also visited Phoenicia. Ireland became isolated for the same reason that a highwayman kills his victim after robbing him, that there might be no one alive to give testimony against him. It has been the settled and most carefully studied British policy to isolate and misrepresent Ireland. We hope that, as the truth comes to light, Englishmen will be moved to make what amends are possible for the horrible mistreatment and oppression which have been inflicted upon that country. The Irish people have suffered untold misery through no fault of their own, but because they had what Rome coveted for her own power, a savior, the Bible, and spiritual sovereignty in the papacy. England was but a tool used by Rome in her striving to attain her end, namely, recognition as the sole source of the divine authority on earth. The aforementioned writer refers, too, to the question of Easter, which Rome is given as her reason for the so-called disciplining of the Irish Church. He tells us that it caused a great deal of trouble in the Church, but endeavors to leave the impression that it never got beyond the limits of a mere polemic affair, a matter of heated discussion. He tells a little of the truth also, which will show, as herein claimed, that the Irish Church of 𝗖𝗔 Christ was the great church of Europe. He has prepared his ground in advance for this brief but partial admission by saying that these establishments in the countries named were set up by Irish priests who were Christian missionaries within the Church of Rome. He refers to peculiarities which the Irish Church had, but says that they were only survivals of what was general at one time throughout the Christian Church, and, of course, Puritan Rome was shocked at those things. He does not tell what those peculiarities were, but it is a natural inference that they must have been horrible and immoral if Rome could not tolerate them. She does not seem, even in this enlightened day, to be shocked at what her priests have done in the Philippine Islands, in Mexico, or in South America. For that matter, we do not need to go outside of our own country to look for evidence of it, but it is not our purpose to treat on Roman corruption or immorality. Here's what the encyclopedia writer says on the fictitious alibi of Easter. Quote, "On the Easter question, especially a contest arose which waxed hottest in England, and as the Irish monks stubbornly adhered to their traditions, they were vehemently attacked by their opponents. This controversy occupies much space in the history of the Western Church and led to an unequal struggle between the Roman and Scotic clergy in Scotland, England, and east of France and Switzerland, and a considerable part of Germany, which naturally ended in the Irish system giving way before the Roman. The monasteries following the Irish rule were supplanted by or converted into Benedictine ones." End quote. 9th edition, page 250. This writer has said much when he admits that the Irish system and the Irish monks, under Irish rule, which of course was the rule of the Irish Supreme Pontiff, were so far afield from Ireland as to be in Britain, Scotland, the east of France, Switzerland, and Germany. Even this far would take the Irish monks quite a distance inland and into the continent of Europe, and proves our statement that the Irish Church of 𝗖𝗔 was there. Is he trying to show that the Irish monks were the sole and only missionaries in those countries, converting the people for the benefit of Rome? This seems to be his object. By his statement, the Irish monks would be the preponderant or greatest element in the Roman Church, and were doing a great deal of zealous work for Rome. This could not be so, for we know that Rome was in the field with hostile armies for centuries. This writer fails to tell us what the Romans themselves were doing all of this time. They were trying to crush the Irish Church. Were not the Romans making any converts at all for their church? Were they simply marking time and letting the Irish do the work of conversion for them? His argument is weak, and its absurdity needs only to be pointed out. When this mere contest, which he would have us believe was all within the Roman Church and waxed hottest in England and the other countries mentioned, was settled, why is it that Rome did not make the same changes in Ireland at that time, where she claims to have been established for so long a period, that she made in England and in those other places? Ireland must have been the seat of the trouble. Why did she not change things there? The reason is obvious. She had not been established there, and this writer only makes her course and her guilt appear all the more conspicuous, so much so that all mankind can see it. Rome, as has been said before, made war on the Irish Church, established all over Europe, and as she advanced with her armed forces, she took possession of the church property and compelled the people to come under her church dominion or be put to death. By forgeries and lies, she has tried to make the world believe that these countries were converted by her missionaries. We will let this apologist for Rome speak once more when he tries to give a little acknowledgement to the Irish monks for what was done by the Irish monks of the religion of 𝗖𝗔 thousands of years before the time he speaks of. He spans a big gap of time and pretends that those Irish monks belonged to the communion of Rome, which of course is false, for Rome came in only later with armies to conquer those countries and, by persecution and death, drove out the Irish monks and their successors. Rome appropriated their labors and works and claimed their very virtues as her own. He employs the very same rule which he frowns upon in others, thinking that in this way he can give his story the appearance of being truthful. Rightly enough, he is familiar with the Roman methods of substitution and her invention of so-called saints where no saints were. He has made such a creditable attempt at misrepresentation in the foregoing part of his article that he can afford to be generous and fair in giving the Irish monks credit. Even he himself is misrepresenting the plainest truth. He says, quote, "Owing to this struggle, the real work of the early Irish missionaries in converting the pagans of Britain and Central Europe and sowing the seeds of culture there has been overlooked when not willfully misrepresented. Thus, while the real work of the conversion of the pagan Germans was the work of Irishmen, 𝗰𝗵𝗽, or as he is better known, St. Boniface, a man of great political ability, reaped the field they had sown, and is called the Apostle of Germany, though it is doubtful if he ever preached to the heathen." End quote. Encyclopedia Britannica, 9th edition, page 250. This shows us what has been Rome's way of making changes and inventing substitutes for purposes of deception, but the plot is now exposed, I hope, in such plain manner that no one will be at a loss to account for the growth of the Roman Church and the cause of the Roman wars against Carthage and the countries of Western Europe, such as France or Gaul, Spain or Iberia, Germany and England. It was to crush the Irish Church of 𝗖𝗵𝗽𝗁 and to obtain the popedom and its accessory possessions, the supreme papacy, the Savior, and the Irish Bible.
What can we say? I know, it's out there. I know. Told you it was going to be controversial. This is just the part one. Part two, we're going to go even deeper into these topics. And the reason I broke it up is just because it's 7 hours long, the original. So I thought it would be more comfortable for you to listen to if it was in 2 parts. Now, before I go, I want to remind you to check out the social media channels and also to visit the website brehonacademy.org. And please visit the merch shop and go and get a couple of t-shirts or something like that. It will really help me out. Now, this is just part one. If you want to see part two, it's going to be right here. And if you want to see what YouTube recommends for you, it's this video over here. Until next time, friends, Slán go fóill.